So we have roll call.
Roll call.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
Commissioner Fung.
Present.
Commissioner Takahashi.
Here.
Vice Chair Saxena. Here. Chairperson Wong.
Here.
All present. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, before we begin today's critical discussion on objective standards, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the passing of someone very integral to the city. One of our former city managers, David Knapp. He passed away on June 19, 2019. While I did not interact with him in this capacity and personally, his impact on the city was wide felt and how he shaped Cupertino into the city that it is today. I'd like to take a moment to read his obituary, take a moment of silence, and hear comments from other members of the Planning Commission and staff that are here. But I want to say this was a special man. He shaped the Cupertino as we know it today. He was born on November 29, 1940, the son of an Episcopal minister and a church school headmistress in Harrison, New York. He grew up in San Antonio, Texas, where he met Kay Langston at the church youth group in 1953. He graduated from Texas Military Institute and University of South in Sewanee, Tennessee. He went on to graduate school at the University of Texas, largely to be near Kay. He married his childhood sweetheart and best friend in 1963 and joined the U.S. Air Force that year after receiving his draft notice. He was assigned to bases all around the country and in Germany. His work involved developing systems of operations to counter the effects of jamming on radar defenses. After 7 years in the service, he resigned his commission, and he and Kay settled in San Diego, where their two sons, Stephen and Michael, were born. He then went to work for the city of San Diego and found his calling in city management. Serving as city manager in Boulder, Colorado, the town of Los Gatos, and here in Cupertino, and then lately in Highland Park, Illinois, he finally retired in 2014 and came back to the Bay Area in Los Gatos. David loved his church, his beloved wife, his sons and their families, his work and the people he worked with. He kept volunteering for nonprofits, traveling, classical music, and reading. He took his baptismal oath to strive for justice and peace and respect the dignity of every human being very seriously. He's survived by his wife of 55 years, Kay, son Stephen, wife Laura, and grandsons Langston and Lackland, son Michael, Michael's wife Sarah, and grandson Tyler and granddaughter Evelyn, his brother Peter and sister Edith Clark, and beloved nieces and nephews. And there's a thanks there to the skilled nursing and oncology staff at Stanford Cancer Center. So memorial services for David, if you know him, will be on Saturday, June 29th at 2 p.m. at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church on Saratoga Avenue in Saratoga. Instead of flowers, please donate them. He wishes that people donate those flowers and donations to the Episcopal Relief and Development or St. Andrew's Episcopal Church and School in Saratoga. Let's take a quick moment of silence, and then we'll hear from our planning commissioners. Okay, any comments from staff or planning commissioners about David Knapp?
I really knew David relatively limited time. I started being engaged in city elements back in 2009, 2010 timeframe. But he always struck me as an individual that really cared a lot, right? And was as mild-mannered a person as you could know, right? And so, and a pleasure to know and work with. So,
Go ahead, Commissioner Fung.
I definitely want to recognize Dave Knapp for his long service to the community. He was always very present, and I think one of the things that's very notable about him is that, he was really there, really engaged, walking around all the time, whether it was at City Hall or, at a community meeting. I found that he really demonstrated a very genuine interest in what people had to say and really wanted to engender, a productive discussion in the community. And that's something, of course, that's critical for any city manager. Dave was particularly supportive of open space. A lot of the the groundwork for the Stevens Creek corridor master plan was done under his time. So you actually recognize that today as the improvements you see at Blackberry Farm, the McClellan Ranch Preserve. I don't think they changed the name until after he had left Cupertino, but a lot of that groundwork was laid there. And I actually serve on the board of directors of Friends of Deer Hollow Farm, which is that heritage farm in Rancho San Antonio. And he actually had showed us a lot of, this is part of my time on the board there, but he had provided a lot of support to the Friends of Deer Hollow, the fundraising organization. There was a time during the recession when the budget impact was very serious in Mountain View. They provide a big chunk of the funding for operating that farm. And Dave actually gave a lot of very positive input to the board members at that time about things that we could do to try to backfill for those lost dollars. And that's very instrumental as to why that Deer Hollow Farm is still operating today. And I just want to say, we've been fortunate to have a lot of great staff members here. And I really think that even among all those great people, Dave really stands out and really distinguished himself. So my condolences to his family.
Any other comments from staff? Anyone else want to add to this? Okay, with that, quick announcements here. We've got a screen on stage right that's out, just so you know. So if you want to see stuff, stay on stage left or be on the left side of the room. We've got two guests. We're going to oral communications. And in oral communications, you have 3 minutes. If you've got any, please fill out the blue card. Please come on up, Stephen Buss.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Buss, and I'm a lead with YIMBY Neoliberal, and I'm on the board of YIMBY Action. I live in San Francisco, and I'm sorry to say that I wish I was here under better circumstances. I'm here to bring light to abusive behavior from Chairperson Wong. Upon learning that I was hosting an event in San Francisco with an employee of Sandhill Property, who you of course know is developing the Balco Mall project, Mr. Wong took to Nextdoor to implore his constituents to disrupt our meeting, saying, "Fight back! Go to their free meeting and defend Cupertino and our way of life. Save the suburbs from our onslaught of anarchists and YIMBY neoliberal fascists." Fascists. Fascists. Chair Wong is calling me and my fellow housing advocates in San Francisco fascists for wanting to build housing. I wish it stopped there. But he continued to harass and threaten us. He said, "Well, we'll just have to talk to Richard's employer, Dropbox." Richard, of course, is behind me in the audience tonight. "Next time you get harassed by a YIMBY, track down their employer and send their HR, legal, and CEO a letter outlining their YIMBY stance. It goes a long way towards getting them reprimanded, and in some cases, a dose of reality." I should note that in every message, Chairperson Wong included his government email address. He may claim he's acting as an individual, but the implication, of course, is that he represents the city of Cupertino. He's clearly using his position of power to silence opposition to his agenda. I, again, wish it stopped there. But his next step was to call me out by name and slander me. He falsely claimed Stephen Buss posted illegal content from Nextdoor onto Twitter in order to run a harassment campaign against a public official, me. He baited and harassed me and others who do not agree with his opinions on housing. He proliferated and continued debate with his tweets to incite not only violence, but harassment. Violence? These are all brazen lies, Commissioners. Furthermore, Commissioner Wong, if you truly think I did something illegal, please go to the police. Commissioners, your chair is abusing his power. He is threatening the livelihoods of his constituents. He's smearing people who disagree with him or seek to defend themselves from his harassment. He is smearing his reputation, the reputations of Cupertino, and his fellow commissioners. Chairperson Wong, you must publicly apologize for threatening the livelihoods of myself and my fellow activists.
We're on time.
You must recuse yourself from any decisions related to the Balco Mall and any possible future projects relating to my employer, Google, or Richard's employer, Dropbox. Frankly, sir, you should resign.
We're at time. Thank you for coming. So appreciate having you here. Our next guest here is, Richard Mellinger, so from Sunnyvale. Thank you for coming.
Chair Wang, I want to speak very clearly that I'm here tonight solely on my own behalf. This past weekend, you launched a diatribe on Nextdoor in response to a public event by Yimby neoliberal, which you just heard about. After excoriating the Balco redevelopment project yet again, you called on residents to defend Cupertino and our way of life, save the suburbs from an onslaught of anarchists and Yimby neoliberal fascists. My friend Stephen Buss, who is co-hosting that event, posted these comments on Twitter. I retweeted this post, commenting that your rant demonstrates that you have clearly prejudged the Balco redevelopment and that you are therefore obligated to recuse yourself from any further involvement on it. I want to emphasize that this is a criticism of you in your capacity as a public official. My retweet got exactly 1 like, and I went on with my evening. That is, until multiple friends of mine messaged me to let me know that you had threatened my job. It has since gotten considerably more attention. Chair Wang, for you to threaten a member of the public's job for criticizing you in your official capacity is undemocratic and unacceptable. You may seek to hide behind your signature disclaimer or your repeated assertions that your threats to my employment were issued solely in a personal capacity, but the simple truth is this. I was criticizing your actions in your capacity as a public official. There is no way for you to respond to that criticism publicly in a personal capacity. Any response is inherently in your public capacity, even if it does not represent the city. Your threats to me, appalling though they would have been even in a personal capacity, rise to the level of a violation of my civil liberties because they were issued in your public capacity. Chair Wang, you accuse us of harassment, violence, and even fascism for daring to criticize you in public. The irony, of course, is that you're projecting. Threatening people's jobs is one of the favored tactics of the new fascists of the alt-right. It is, in fact, profoundly illiberal. It creates a clear, chilling effect, discouraging members of the public from exercising their First Amendment rights to criticize you and other public officials in this city. Chair Wang, I am not afraid of your threats, but there are many, many people in this valley who would be on the street if they lost their next paycheck. The precarity of their situation is due to the racist, classist, and exclusionary policies which you and your allies in Better Cupertino consistently defend and attempt to further. They do not have the savings I do, the security I do, the privilege I do. Faced with angry, wealthy public officials threatening their jobs for exercising their First Amendment rights, many will no doubt choose to remain silent. And that, sir, is why I could not let this slide. That is why I'm here tonight, and that is why I will not let this matter rest. Chair Wang, your bullying has brought this city into legal jeopardy. Though considering that the thought of a $24 million or even $120 million fine doesn't seem to bother you, I don't see why you'd start caring now. You have disgraced the commission you chair and the city you claim to serve. You have violated your oath of office by attacking civil liberties enshrined in the American and California constitutions, which you, sir, are sworn to uphold. Your actions have left you with only one remaining ethical and honorable course of action, and that is to step down from that dais and resign, effective immediately.
Well, thank you for coming. Appreciate having you here. So, okay, well, not seeing any other open communications, we'll move to anything on written communications. Do we have anything there?
We actually have to do the minutes.
Yeah, and we have to do approval minutes as well, so. You have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the minutes as adopted, or as presented.
I second.
Okay. All in favor of having minutes? Any discussion, actually? Okay. All right, the minutes carry 5-0. All right, anything on written communications? All right.
Over in communications.
Anything on consent calendar? I think we're okay. All right. Study session on objective standards is item in agenda number 2. So once again, if you've got any questions, comments pertaining to the actual agenda item, please jump in and fill out a blue card, bring them over here, and then you can complete with that. So, all right.
Good evening, Commissioners. I can provide a brief explanation of tonight's agenda item, which is basically laid out in the staff report we prepared. As you all know, the Council has directed staff and the Commission to review the city's existing general plan and zoning policies and standards to ensure that there are no gaps or other holes that would enable a large project to come to the city with limited discretionary review. So we undertook that review process in the city attorney's office with coordination from staff and prepared the attachments to the staff report. You'll note that attachment 1 sets out a phase 1 of the project, whereby we looked at various standards in the general plan and zoning policies to ensure that they laid out setbacks and height requirements and other objective standards that can be utilized in the project review process. These are largely undertakings that can be done in a short amount of time, and we urge you to consider them for near-term adoption. You're welcome to provide any comments you might have tonight or recommendations based on the proposed approach that we've provided on the right-hand side of that attachment. There's a second attachment, I think labeled attachment 3 to the staff report, which includes all of your recommendations from the past meeting we held on policies the city could consider moving forward. Those are somewhat longer-term endeavors. Not all of them are things that could be worked on immediately by staff and by the attorney's office. Nonetheless, we do appreciate your input on those items. And you might note that on page 2 of the staff report, we've laid out a couple questions, I think 3 questions, as a framework for the discussion tonight. You're welcome to answer those questions in your discussion. You're not confined by them. And we look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. As a team, let's, since we're in the spirit of or the way we do our discussions, would it make sense if we just go by each item and then see if we have comments and get to that? And I think that might be the easiest way. And then if we've got any areas of dissent, we can actually debate and discuss those, and see what we can move together in one collective package. And then anything we have disagreements on, have a discussion at that point. Does that make okay? Sound okay to everybody?
Chair Wong, I would like if we could go through the phase 1 set of recommendations
First, yes.
in that manner.
Yep.
And then for phase 2, if we could, again, go line by line, and if there's items in phase 2 that we would like to pull out and
Into phase 1?
and add,
Okay.
right, add into phase 1, and then we might need to edit them as well. And then, because one of the suggestions in their summary of questions is to the prioritization. So after we've pulled out the items from phase 2 into phase 1, we can then prioritize the remainder of the phase 2 items. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea. Is everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious if staff has any comment. If these were divided by the bandwidth that the staff had to prepare them, then moving things from phase 2 to phase 1 would that present a problem?
I think the commission is welcome to have that conversation. If you feel like there are items that you wish to be looked at, evaluated prior to phase 2, we can certainly package that and submit that to City Council and figure out how we can address that.
Okay, so the goal with pulling the items from phase 2 is to pick the simplest ones there that would have the least amount of extra research having to go along with it. Because I know that some of the items in phase 2 will take a lot of review from staff.
So that's actually different. If you're selecting them on the basis of the amount of work, that's different than on their priority. Perhaps as an alternative, we should draw a second, if we want to make a 1.9 group or something that is things drawn from phase 2, but, at a higher priority. That might be
Let's do this first. For the purposes of efficiency, let's get through this first document, attachment 1, and look through there. And if we see anything in attachment 2 that we want to bring into attachment 1, let's bring it from there. But let's at least get through attachment 1, take a break, and then come back from there, because I think it might take some time. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Attachment 1, and just for the public that's out there, these objective standards dictate how our general plan and how we look at building and planning across the board. And I think it's really important that we're going to read these and kind of explain what these are. So if you're looking at attachment 1 today, is there any questions on footnote number 1? And I'll read it out loud. The existing section says, maintain the primary building bulk below a 1-to-1 slope line drawn from the Arterial Boulevard curb line or lines except for the Crossroads area. The issue that's been put into hand is this standard applies to sites or portions of sites that adjoin arterioles or boulevards identified in the Channel Plan's Chapter 5 Mobility to include D'Anzo Boulevard, Homestead Road, Stevens Creek Road, Boulevard, up to Bub Road, and North Wolf Road. Sites or portions of sites that do not adjoin arterial or boulevards are subject to the setbacks and height limits established in the zoning code. The proposal is to revise the note to state explicitly that the applicable standards in the zoning code govern setbacks and height limits for portions of sites not adjoining arterioles or boulevards. Any comments there?
Okay, so I've seen this particular standard before, and I've had some issues with it. One is the location of the curb line. Are we talking about the final curb line if we have a street widening situation and perhaps a frontage road is being added? And so I'd like to see that the 1-to-1 slope line is drawn from the final curb line, and somehow explain that if there is a frontage road, that you're going to go all the way to the inside, of the curb line, and not use the existing curb, because it makes a significant difference where that building is going to be set back. And the other issue is it's saying primary building bulk, and that is that gets into a discretionary or subjective issue where, what does primary building bulk mean? So I would prefer that also to just say maintain the building below the 1-to-1 slope line drawn. And then I'm a little bit confused about the issue section where they say sites or portions of sites that do not adjoin arterial or boulevards are subject to the setbacks and height limits established in the zoning code. I'd like that to be explained.
Is that to staff or is that just in general? Okay. Okay.
I think with this section, what we're trying to express is portions of a property that is not attached to a major street are subject to the limitations already established in the zoning code. That's really what that says.
Okay, so if we're looking at a planned development and part of that site is adjacent to an arterial, so part of that site will be subject to the 1-to-1 setback, but if there's another street going through that property, which is not an arterial, and we're talking about a planned development, then there is no setback.
Theoretically speaking, yeah.
And that would be the normal situation for any P development, right? That the how do I want to say it? Terms of approval would set things like internal setback.
Correct.
Okay, so can this be altered so that the portions of sites that don't adjoin arterial or boulevards are subject to, at minimum, the 1-to-1 setback of the rest of the site?
That's for the commission to discuss and
It's up for us to
provide
determine.
direction.
To determine.
So I think that misses the point of a P development. You're saying that there will be certain functions happening, in the specific zone, and that the decision about the characteristics of the things that are within that P zone, are subject to the building code for the elements, and subject to the the approval at the the approval terms of creating the P zone.
Well, what this requirement, the 1-to-1 slope setback requirement, would effectively do is along the major arterials, you would have the building setback, and then if we don't also if we're not consistent with that setback on the streets which are not arterials, you can then end up basically with a canyon effect, which is not in keeping with what the rest of the site would be looking like. And I don't think that that is the intention of having the one-to-one setback. So I don't like the inconsistency.
So, Commissioner Moore, for my understanding, what this means is you could, in principle, have a PUD and have a frontage road, and just having the frontage road will allow you to bypass the one-to-one requirements.
What you could do, you could interpret this as being that your existing curb line is where you're going to draw your one-to-one setback line from, even though there would be a requirement that you would have a street widening and possibly even a frontage road. So you could be pulling the curb back, 20, 30 feet and still go off of the original curb line. So that would be the first thing that does not seem to be in the spirit of this requirement. So I would want it to be at the final frontage curb line. And then the second part, which doesn't seem to be in keeping with this, is that if you have a property which is, say, on a corner that has a major arterial on one side, and then the other street is not a major arterial, you can then have the setback on the arterial, and then basically go right up to, the property line on the street, which isn't the arterial, and have essentially a pretty awkward looking design.
So you're doing this to cut out loopholes?
Well, two things. You cut out the loopholes for the first part, and then be concerned about the aesthetics, creating the canyon effect where you've basically got, you could go have 7 stories right up against the sidewalk, basically.
Yeah, I think
Commissioner Takas? Okay. Commissioner Takas?
Yeah. Question for staff in terms of the zoning code and setbacks associated with non-arterials. What is that requirement?
What do you mean by that? What's the requirement?
Well, the way this is written is that for arterials, we have the one-to-one requirement. And I agree that the point of reference is something that probably needs to be clear. However, it says such a portion of sites that do not adjoin arterials or boulevards are subject to the setbacks and height limits established in the zoning code. So what is that setback associated with a commercial development?
So it'll depend on the zoning code, but there is setback requirements and height requirements for a variety of different zoning types, right? What this is attempt to do is to make sure that that portions of the property that are not adjoined by major boulevards are comply with the requirements in the code.
Right.
So if that's the intent, could we?
Right. That's the point. We
intent.
don't. As I think about this and we discuss this, we need to know what the point of reference really is, right? Because if we go one-to-one on all any adjoining any street, if you will, what does that really look like versus does the code as it stands really allow for 7 stories adjacent to that road? So that's what I was asking.
If that's the intent, would a language change that said revised note to state explicitly that the applicable standards in the zoning code govern setbacks and height limits for all sites except noted? Maybe that's probably more specific for that intention.
Yeah, still would like to know what.
Yeah, but
where
how
we're
would,
at.
well, whatever, there was never a case when those wouldn't apply, right?
Right. You'd have to
there's
seek an exception. But
Yeah.
I just not familiar with what that.
Well, if we're looking
requirement
at a planned development, you won't have any setbacks
No,
for
they don't have any
for the
requirements.
side street.
Anything on the piece don't have requirements.
Right, but it'll be evaluated on a project as a whole and evaluated against the adjacent properties and what's nearest, what are the high limits and what the requirements are there, and make sure they're consistent.
And that evaluation happens at staff level, not at the planning commission.
Correct. The staff evaluates every single project. That's against the code.
Okay, so, right, so when we did a project recently, and it was a planned development, we didn't make, we being the planning commission, did not make any decisions about.
The former planning commission or the current?
This
the current one?
current
Okay,
one.
Okay.
Right, just a few weeks ago, we
Public
had
storage.
one.
Public storage.
Exactly. And so there were setbacks which were negotiated between the developer and city staff, and we really did not have any input either way about them. And, you know, when do we get to negotiate those, or, you know, or do we get to negotiate those setbacks?
And
Can we answer that question first and then jump to yours, Commissioner Saxena?
So I think the code is pretty clear about the rules, regulation, and duties of planning commission. So that tells you what you act and review. City staff's rule was just to evaluate the project, right, against the code, and make recommendations to you for either approval or recommendation to the city council.
Okay, so if it came to us, a project with certain setbacks which had been negotiated, and we did not like those setbacks, how could that be, you know, remedied?
I think you could certainly, as a commission, if there's consensus that the setback is insufficient or inadequate, you certainly could make that recommendation.
yeah, I think I want to create a few hypothetical scenarios and just see what the setbacks would look like. And I'm not sure whether we have all the information right now, but that's something I'd like to have a look at to make sure that whatever we have right now is consistent with the spirit of what of the design and the look and feel we want to have. So in some way, I'm hoping that those kind of decisions don't have to come to the Planning Commission at all, because they're very clearly specified. But from what I've understood here, at least I don't know what those setbacks would be, and I'm new here, so I don't claim to know everything. But could we get some would what those setbacks would be under the current guidelines?
Can I talk about the SB 35 plan as it relates to Balco Parkway and the setbacks there?
That's fine. I'd also like to add quickly, in case it helps the commission, I think the item that you're talking about now is actually in this Phase 1 document. It's the last row, and it has to do with zoning in planned development zones. So I don't know if you want to save this till then, but you may proceed anyway.
Well, I think they're sort of related in some way, because we are specifying something for certain things, and I would essentially want to consider both of them together in some way so that we have very clear and well-defined specifications without ambiguity, and we understand what they are.
Okay. So I haven't said anything for a while here. Let me ask one question to staff to clarify about frontage roads. The determination of the one-to-one setback is always done on the final boundary lines, right? Not on the preliminary ones. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's not an issue. I think the other part, my reading on this, and if it's not correct, please correct me. In a P zone, there is the opportunity. You may find within that development that a road passing through an internal road may not have one-to-one setbacks, and that is part of the approval of the P zone. But the setbacks that have to exist there would be the ones that exist in code for the sorts of buildings that are there. Public storage, for instance, if that was an industrial site or whatever category that is, has a setback requirement. It would have to meet that unless, as part of their P zone application, they asked for a change, I believe.
That's correct. The P zone does allow some flexibility.
I would actually say that if when we get to the P zone thing, let's come back to this comment. But for now, if you guys are okay with revising this to get rid of all that stuff around not adjoining arterials or boulevards, to say the zoning code governs setbacks and height limits for all sizes except noted, would that do the job?
I still need some clarification on the final curb being where the one-to-one line is drawn from, because I have.
So you would be explicit?
I have an example of where that has not occurred.
Okay, how would you revise that language, Commissioner Moore?
Drawn from the final
Just
curb
curious,
line, whether
question.
it is from the a frontage road or the curb of the arterial, something like that.
What would be
So-
the right language that you would suggest?
I get, but just a quick question. Do we know then, in that case, was it we'll call it a miss, if you will, by city staff in terms of allowing that to happen? Or,
I'm going to say something. There's been a lot of
or
exceptions.
is it written such that it is subject to interpretation? Because I think that's important, because if it's written clearly and it wasn't adhered to in this particular case, that's one case versus interpretation, which I totally agree we need clarification. So I guess a little more understanding of what is that requirement, such that do we need to strengthen that language and make it more clear, or is the specific case that you're thinking of, which I don't know the details of, was that just conveniently by missed or something else, right? So just curious.
Well, if what we're doing is objective standards in the general plan, and all we have is that document in front of us, then I would say it's vague, and it needs clarification. If there is another document within the planning department that has some legal basis, or that that they have to follow it, I'd like to know about that.
Right.
So it sounds like what you're saying, it should be at the curb line or property line, whichever is more restrictive.
No?
No.
Go on, Jibber.
No, at the final curb line,
final
and if
curb
you're
line.
using a frontage
You mean
road.
the final curb line.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Right.
So
Right,
can we revise
and that speaks to Alan's question, if there is a case in some plan, any plan, where it was not drawn from the final curb line, or it was taken from the original curb line rather than the final, then the question is, was that a error in processing, or is that a interpretation
Right.
that you want to try to address?
Right.
So if I revise this to say, blah, 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 govern setbacks at height limits for all sites at the final curb line, except noted, is that okay with all of you guys?
I'd still like to have the frontage road somehow added in there to really make it.
All right. Do you have proposed language?
Ben, is a frontage road defined in the municipal code?
I'll have to confirm that. I don't think so, but.
I guess the question would be, is there really any harm in adding that language to this particular, as anybody else sees it?
I'm okay with it. I just want to make sure we got the right language.
Yeah, I just don't like to add extra rules when there's already a rule written and it wasn't followed necessarily. So it's a different issue. But I don't know if it really has no real element of.
Yes. And if that rule did
Ambiguity.
exist, then this won't fix it.
Right.
So,
Right.
Commissioner, we will be back. This is the first attempt of many. So
Right.
if you want to give us that direction for staff to further evaluate this particular section, on whichever portion of this section, we'll certainly look at that and bring it back.
I'd like to get this all done tonight.
Well, okay, so how about you just say the curb line that is closest to the building?
Development, building.
Okay, final language is here, unless you got a comment. Revised note to state explicitly
Yeah.
that the applicable standards in the zoning code govern setbacks and height limits for all sites at the final curb line closest to the building, except noted. Proposed
Right.
building?
Yeah.
Hey, it's on the fly. Welcome to open government.
Well, everything here is a proposal, right?
Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be, so that's really not necessary.
I don't think so. Okay, you guys all agree with this? Can we agree on consent on revised note to state explicitly that the applicable standards in the zoning code govern setbacks and height limits for all sites at the final curb line closest to the building, except noted? That's the final reading here. Is okay with us? And in the event that you change your mind later, just let me know. We'll move to the next one.
Be except as noted.
Except
probably.
as noted.
And I also would like to make clear that the language in the proposed column is not verbatim language that we're proposing. This is,
Oh, I thought it was, sorry. Oh.
No, that's why it's not in quotation marks. So these are concepts that the staff is putting forward right now. And I believe the point that Ben was trying to make earlier is that the final language will come back before the commission for adoption, because these are going to be zoning amendments or general plan amendments eventually.
Okay.
So we're at the conceptual stage right now and not drafting language. Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure they, okay.
But is the last portion of that sentence not adjoining arterioles or boulevards? Is that?
I'm taking that off
You're
in
taking
this
it
reading.
off.
Well,
So isn't that less restrictive?
yeah.
Because it completely removes the one-to-one element on arterioles and boulevards? Is that what we want?
It could be less or more, depending.
So I would caution us trying to frame the particular language at the dais. I think what I hear from the commission, concerns about location of one-to-one being drawn from, whether it's final curb line or proposed building site or closest to building. There's also some concerns about singling out sites or portion of sites. You want to make that all sites. So these are comments that we'll take into account. Your proposed language is just as that. It's a proposed language. We'll take a look at that. We'll get the point that you're trying to make. We'll come back again, obviously, and we'll have better clarification hopefully next time to provide you so that you can come up with a proposed language.
Just from a schedule perspective, if we come back again on July 9th, right, to approve that language, it gets to council July 16th. Would they have to, how many readings would they have to do to beat and perceive August deadline?
Well, the current plan outlined in the staff report is that after your recommendations today, it goes to council, and then based on council's guidance, then draft language would be proposed to the commission, and then.
So how many meetings is that before we're done? Is what I'm trying to get
I
to.
would need a calendar in front of me, which I don't have, but.
Okay, and while you're looking at that, let's see if anyone else has
Okay.
any other comments.
So is this going to end up being an ordinance or a resolution
Yeah.
for city council?
Well, we are considering general plan amendments, or putting them before you, and zoning changes. So zoning change would be an ordinance, and a GPA is typically done by a legislative action or resolution.
Resolution.
So, yeah.
Okay, so the ordinances would need 2 readings, is that right? And one
Typically,
reading
yes.
on the, okay.
It'd be better if we got this done soon. That's given all the housing bills that are ahead of us.
So actually, just for more clarification from staff here, what curb lines would you, what curb lines exist that are not arterial or boulevard?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to ask that again.
I'm curious what other, if this, there's verbiage in here that directs us toward arterial and boulevard, or if this is from the, from the footnote.
Yeah, the existing footnote, correct.
So, and that is drawn in contrast to, other surface streets, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
So like,
So I think that actually speaks to the question about
Right.
the change in wording that removed arterial and boulevard.
Right.
Had a issue there where it was extending that to surface streets or non-arterial, non-boulevard streets. So I'd be careful about that, although I think that generally would have applied anywhere here.
Well, the example I'm thinking of is like Santana Row. If we think about some of the adjacent smaller streets, and those, if those required one-to-one, it would dramatically change the look of that development. And given, how that particular street is defined, and how much traffic it carries, I think would weigh into that.
Santana Row in San Jose, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Just make sure.
exactly. And given it's developed specifically inside the project itself, it seems like it needs to be weighed and assessed as the project as a whole in terms of the look and feel that project is after. That was my point in terms of if you did one-to-one everywhere, then you have pyramids everywhere, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're going to create.
Well, we want to get away from the stepped look, that pyramid effect that you're describing.
Right.
So it's
So
a
if it-
set- it's a
Come see the
setback.
pyramids of Cupertino.
But see, if it were one-to-one on any adjacent street and it's a square block, you're gonna essentially have a pyramid, right?
Oh, okay, so let's just imagine you were going to build something on Stevens Creek and Stelling, and Stevens
Right.
Creek being the arterial and Stelling not being the arterial.
Wouldn't Stelling be considered an arterial?
Stelling is also an arterial, but-
Stelling is
but
definitely an
understand.
Would it?
arterial.
Okay, so
Yes.
let's find something with less traffic on it. Say we're looking at Wolf and Valco Parkway. Would you want Valco Parkway to have a
Those are both
one-to-one?
arterial
Yeah,
as
I
well.
think those-
Balco Parkway isn't the Wolf.
But it's not labeled in the there's a map in the general plan, and it's not
It's
labeled.
not arterial on the map, in this map.
It's surprising that it's not an arterial. It wouldn't be the definition of an arterial.
Because it's
for the city.
connecting,
We should probably pull that map up.
Connecting Tantau
Yeah.
and Wolf.
yeah, my
I think maybe the example would be Stevens Creek and Mary heading toward the bridge. Now, Mary is clearly,
Stevens
well,
Creek and Mary.
it-
Because Mary
because it's a
dead
dead
ends.
end, it
Dead
can't be
end.
an arterial,
Right.
right?
It's a dead end.
Well, you can get through.
You can get through.
You can get through.
No, people get through. People go through the neighborhood. My neighborhood, but you know.
Sorry to hear. No, but on a serious note, right? I mean, I think what we're trying to do here is take back a little bit of control in terms of what's seen and be a little more explicit as to what the setbacks are. I would assume that, exemptions and exemptions will be granted as needed if we really
Right,
want
but it
pyramids.
comes down to, go ahead.
So for the case of Santana Row, the way I would envision that being is that, Santana Row is an example of something that would be a P-zone. The setbacks, by default, from the outside, exterior to the P-zone, would all be,
Right, Winchester
conforming,
and Stevens Creek.
That would be whatever it is, whatever their thing is.
Yeah.
The internal streets, whether those are private or whatever, that's actually,
As
I can believe that would be
project
something.
specific.
Project specific.
Right.
Although it has a default. And so the interesting question is, what is the default? That default would be what comes from the current municipal code,
Right.
right, which may or may not be one-to-one. And then, of course, if you wanted to build Santana Row, the applicant could come and say, I would like to have
I
a
need to take
5-to-1.
exception, yeah.
I'd like to have a 5-to-1 exception, right? And that P-zone, internal to the P-zone, that would be something that the council could approve.
Commissioner Moore, you want to put something up on the opaque projector?
Yes, I've got the circulation network, which shows the our boulevards, the arterials.
Do you want to put that in the red? For those of you enjoying this conversation, we're going deep into the general plan, and if you can follow here on figure M2, you'll see this on the screen. So, yes, and the screen on the right is broken. Please visit the screen on the left if you need to get a better view.
It's pretty clear. Okay, so you'll see you've got the boulevards, the arterials, those are marked, and in the situation for Valco Parkway, the color is a little bit difficult to see here, but it is not an arterial, so it would not, according to this map, get the one-to-one. And I can't really tell with Stelling, but it looks like it would have a double. You would need a double line to indicate that it's the
Right, I
boulevard.
guess, what's the definition of major collectors? Is a major collector an arterial?
No.
Not on the,
Well, not here, but also not in general.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, in the definition, it's saying boulevards and arterial are the same thing. Is that the intent? Right? Boulevards, arterials. I mean, boulevards, I think of De Anza and Stevens Creek as boulevards.
Boulevard has a median in the center, right? I mean, otherwise, the expected flow is probably similar.
Right. But if you ask VTA what an arterial is and where they're running lines,
Sure.
Stelling is a VTA line.
Yeah.
So I think, to your point, Commissioner Moore, probably even that map needs a little attention in terms of definitions to be more clear, right?
Okay, could you be more specific about what that map means?
That map is saying a boulevard is an arterial, and that's it, right? So therefore, there are no real either the two boulevards are arterials or there are only boulevards, right? So there are not boulevards and arterials. And so what is is a major collector an arterial? That's I think the point of definition that needs to be discussed and or made because it's not clear.
It's not clear is the point.
Yeah, I think that's the essence of a lot of stuff. Yeah.
We're trying to make it clear. How can we make it clear?
So for the commission, I understand that the intent for this item number 1 on our list tonight is to make it more strict, right?
More explicit, not necessarily strict. More
Okay.
explicit.
Less ambiguous, I think is.
Right. So we'll take that direction unless you want to go into the weeds of the discussion.
I want to go back to how many meetings are we to passing this and what this timetable looks like? Because some things I don't want to push out to another meeting if we're going to miss an impact to any other housing laws that might hit us.
Yeah, so anything right now based on the calendar is just an estimate, obviously. The next possible meeting, the City Council that your recommendations tonight could be brought to, I believe is the 16th of July.
Oh yeah, 4th of July, that's right.
Right.
Yep, got it.
Yeah. And then the next Planning Commission meeting after that is the 23rd. Realistically, I mean, that's a week's time between that council meeting and the Planning Commission. I don't think it's realistic to draft zoning changes in a GP amendment in a week. So then we'd be potentially looking at almost a month from the 16th, which is August 13, is the Planning Commission meeting, and then the next council meeting after that is the 20th. And if you need 2 readings, then you're looking at least the beginning of September, and that's a very, I think, aggressive timeline here.
Are we allowed to have special meetings in
Yeah.
order to move this along quicker?
I think we may need to have some special meetings to move this along. We're basically up against a August deadline here. And I think council would probably, not speaking for council, but I would assume that they're in agreement that this needs to move faster. So let's keep going. Let's
May I add one item to this? So since we've looked at these other streets, I would suggest adding to footnote 1, add in avenues, parentheses, major collectors, and avenues, parentheses, minor collectors to the language on footnote 1, and just group them all in together for now, or at least put that in as a suggestion, so that they can determine how much traffic is actually on those streets.
It may actually make sense to go the other direction and then add the chart to the list of things for revision, rather than, so that you unify the things that it is that, I don't want to say that. You're looking for roads of above a certain level of impact, and we probably should make sure that list is correct. Stelling is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Well, you seem to think that Balco Parkway should have counted as an arterial, and interestingly enough, Tantau, which has a lot of traffic now, is considered an avenue. Major collector, but not a boulevard arterial. So I think if I were to follow what you're saying, it would make it less restrictive, and I'm suggesting pull these other types of collectors into the definition, into the footnote for, along with arterial boulevards.
I think I'm actually saying something different. I think that the map that we're looking at, this identifying arterials, is accurate as of 2013 when it was going in, right? And that actually may be the thing that, if there's a question about is Balco Parkway is an arterial, is it a collector, that should probably just be rectified, and then from that I think the wording will should become clear.
You could do it that way. I think it might be easier at first to just pull them in and just make the assumption that traffic has increased that much and that they do meet the definition, and then go back and do some more studying.
Yeah, see, the reason you want to do that analysis is, because you'll have a discussion then about Stelling or some other
Right.
small road, and it isn't clear, if the naming of the roads is not uniform, then it would be very difficult. You're going to you'll have to have many, many exceptions to pick up the
Right.
roads that, that reflect the current state, and that too will not carry forward into the future. So I would do it that way.
So if we're trying to be more restrictive, my suggestion is kind of a quick and simple way to do that.
How would you read that? And
I don't know, I guess to say all of those minor and major collectors become arterials does need to be further assessed, as opposed to a global statement that they are all arterials, because I think there's differences. And if we create a highly restrictive element, then I don't know. It's this balance with regard to really how many projects are on, how many pieces of land are actually on those that have potential to be developed. You could overlay that, and also.
There are also defaults for each
Right.
for each category of road, every surface street at every level. There is a default. It is
Right.
unlikely that the default is for a building that is more than 1-to-1. So it's not clear why you would want it. I mean, it's interesting. I believe it's possible that Boulevard, the Boulevard and Arterial thing exists because there were examples where there was a higher slope allowed on those roads. That may be.
And I would not discount future parcel consolidation and developments happening, even if we don't see them coming now. So while we're at it, let's try to get it clearly defined.
Commissioner Moore?
I'd like to just quickly read off which ones were considered avenues. You've got Foothill from Homestead to Stevens Creek Boulevard, Stevens Creek Boulevard from Foothill to Bub Road from Stevens Creek to McClellan, and pretty much all of Bollinger. Yes, all of Bollinger, and Miller from Stevens Creek Boulevard down to Bollinger, and Tantau between Homestead and Stevens Creek Boulevard. And I missed one, which was Stelling, Homestead to Stevens Creek Boulevard. And it sounds like we kind of agree that all of those should be
Arterials.
considered.
Given
right.
what
So
Apple
why don't we
did to
just
limit
take
traffic on Tantau, I don't even know if that considers anymore either. Given the limits on what Apple did to Tantau, I don't even know if that is considered arterial. It's so restrictive.
Well, I think if you're looking at the amount of traffic which is on it now, and that they had to do a TDM plan for it, I think that's kind of, it's signaling to us that is indeed an arterial, just due to the amount of traffic there. Anyway, so my suggestion is if you're not ready to take the major collectors and the minor collectors and add them both in, I think we do have some agreement that avenues, the major collectors, should be moved into the footnote 1 Arterial Boulevard curb line statement. Are
Any
we
disagreement?
okay with that?
I think we're all okay with that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. And then maybe that's actually a phase 2 item then to update that map.
Yeah. All right, we moving on?
Yeah, let's move to footnote number 2, but let's agree that on phase 1, it's, how would you read this? Just so we have some reading so that our acting director of planning has a good understanding of where we're headed. You want to go?
So the first issue was the existing statement said maintain the primary building bulk. We want to just have that be maintain the building below a 1-to-1 slope line drawn from the arterial / boulevard, comma, avenue / major collector, curb line or lines, except for the Crossroads area, and something, the indicator that we have about whether it's frontage road or arterial, you already had some previous language about that to try to clean up.
Can I ask the staff about the definition of building bulk? It's actually, I mean, there was a proposal for the thing that's called the Goodyear Hotel, where that was a factor. I'm just curious what does the planning department think with regard to how that's interpreted?
How, are you talking specifically for a project, or are you
Buil-
talking about
building
how the bulk is interpreted? There's no,
There's an interpretation of, if I use that example of the Goodyear Hotel plans that were brought forth in the in the gateway process, that has sections of the building which are the center section of the building is behind the slope line, the sides of the building are not. And I'm just curious how that interpretation is made.
I'll have to get back to you on that one, especially on these project-specific inquiries. I can sort of get back to you on that.
I think that's actually come up in a number of cases where there are features that project through that line, and there's a determination made at some point about whether that was conforming or not. It's sufficient to just research that and report back.
All right, so the language now includes what? Includes the arterioles that we have. Is that correct? I just want to make sure there. And footnote 2 is this issue on Crossroads. Would you still include Crossroads? Because footnote 2 says, let's get rid of Crossroads.
I'd actually suggest we remove this one entirely. There's the comment here, the issue was that no Crossroads streetscape plan has been adopted. But if you look in the heart of the city specific plan, they actually do talk in the section where they refer to the streetscape, streetscape plan, to the same plan. They actually say, and if there isn't one, then you use the central heart of the city plan.
Should we be explicit through that?
So I think this is probably not necessary. The issue I'd have with the proposed amendment is, it says that the default one-to-one standard applies. I'm not sure what the standard is. It's interesting, the streetscape standard for central heart of the city doesn't specify a slope. But clearly, it was sufficient for whatever the purpose was. I think might have a printout of that. So I think this is probably not ambiguous. So that would,
Any comments on here? Commissioner Takahashi? Commissioner Saxena? Good. Commissioner Moore?
I'm pulling up the Crossroads area to look at it. Personally, I like the proposed language, the default one-to-one standard. Because you're looking at Stevens Creek and De Anza, so I would not be removing that. It should be consistent across all of Stevens Creek.
if there's a default, then the default is there already. You don't need to explicitly say it again.
Okay, so I'd want to see the default before I would agree to it, and I would prefer that if this default is existing in some other plan, I would prefer that it was at top level in the general plan.
Okay.
I think that it clarifies things.
But the general plan includes specific plans, so it's in the heart of the city specific plan. It's page 10. They talk about design concept for streetscapes. The top of that page, on the right-hand side, it says Crossroads, and it says refer to the Crossroads area streetscape plan for details. It then says where it is, and then it says until such time the Crossroads area plan is adopted, development should comply with the requirements for Central Stevens Creek Boulevard, and then that's the next section there. So it's defined, it's fully defined.
What are you reading from, Commissioner?
This is from the heart of the city specific plan.
Okay. Commissioner Moore?
From our experience with the lack of a specific plan for the Balco area, I wouldn't risk leaving this hanging out there without having a set requirement.
Yeah.
So
This-
I'm
this
really
is a-
against that.
This is a specific plan. It's an adopted specific plan.
That's
So
referring to a non-existent plan, so I would nail it down and
And-
say 1-to-1.
it refers to a non-existent plan, and then says, as such time, the Crossword area plan is adopted, until such time, the Crossroads area plan is adopted, development should comply with the requirements for the Central Stevens Creek Boulevard, which immediately follows. It's not ambiguous in any way.
I think there's a fear that might not be adopted that way when it comes to reality. And I think what we've had in a lot of these situations is a lot of ambiguity in terms of our plan and what's written. What's a way...
This is not ambiguous, right?
What's a way to understand what the default is all the time?
Yeah, actually, that was my concern also.
Yeah,
'cause
that,
we
that,
talked
that
about-
appears on LU1, or the LU2. There's a default unless otherwise identified in a special area or, or the other things are the gateways and nodes that are identified in that map. That is 1-to-1, right? So I think that this is not ambiguous. I definitely could see how it looks that way in the specific plan, or in the general plan, but in the specific plan, shouldn't be.
Let's all pull up the Crossroads specific plan.
So is the commission concerned with the designation of the word default, or are you concerned about adding the 1-to-1 to the proposal? I'm trying to understand what.
I think that staff's 1-to-1 proposal is correct, and that is the one I would go with.
Okay.
And I would say that the programmer in me, you have a default. That default may in the future not be 1-to-1. And you're better off writing the legislation such that if you intend something to be the default, unless overridden, then you should write it that way.
How many if-then statements is that?
Actually, you get rid of them by that, through that method.
0.
So,
No, that's my point. 0. There you go.
yeah, but it's not ambiguous.
It's
You
not
know,
ambiguous.
If there's a reason for it, if there's a reason for this to be specific.
I'm saying that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's good.
If there's a reason for this to be 1-to-1, regardless of what the default may be set elsewhere in the city, that would be when you would put the specific verbiage in. Otherwise, you don't. Leave it to the default.
Commissioner Moore?
I guess I really don't like, after our experience with the Balco SB 35 project, I really don't like seeing a second document being referenced from the first, especially when we look at these footnotes that they've got the other areas defined. Why are we going to, for footnote 2, go reference some, secondary document when we can just make it really simple?
So you want to make it at the top level?
Right. We just look at this map, and there it is, and we're done.
Okay, so what is your proposal?
Do exactly as staff advised.
Anyone have a problem with what staff has advised here?
Yeah. We should remove the entire thing.
You want to remove the entire thing and not deal with what staff advised?
No. I think that there's an oversight in the recommendation. There's a default. The default exists. There's an explanation for what to do in Crossroads when the Crossroad plan that's referenced doesn't exist. It's completely unambiguous.
So in a process perspective, as we go through each item, and I talk to our attorney, Seth, should we just vote on these different things as we move it up individually, like when we get to a situation like this? Because it sounds like we've got a difference in opinion here. That probably sounds like the right process.
So I will say on this one, a prior version of our spreadsheet here did actually have delete as an alternative to amend, and actually in addition to delete, it said if you delete, then you should also delete the reference in footnote 1 to except for the Crossroads area. So That is an alternative we considered. We ended up going with this one. I honestly couldn't tell you why. I mean, I don't remember why we went with this one. So that is an option. As for the chair's question, obviously it'd be ideal if we can arrive after going through each of these at a kind of a package that the commission makes a motion on in one motion, but if you want to proceed piece by piece,
I'm just trying to contemplate how it's going to work structurally here, that's all.
So you could remove footnote number 2 and the except for the Crossroads area out of footnote 1, but somehow it needs to be explained that the Crossroads area is included in the 1-to-1. So is that, if you remove footnote 2 and you remove the rest of the sentence from footnote 1 referencing the Crossroads area, are you still going to end up with a 1-to-1 setback requirement?
Yes, because the Crossroads is on a boulevard, right?
Yeah. You've put the boulevards back in.
Okay, and you've added avenues and major collectors, so...
Avenues.
Okay.
He's not budging. He's not budging.
Avenues, major collectors are together. That's all one type of thing.
Right.
Okay. So.
And the other to be discussed in
Okay.
phase 2.
So if what you're saying is true, then I'm okay with removing footnote 2 and deleting the rest of the sentence in footnote 1, which is referencing the Crossroads area.
Okay. Everybody okay with getting rid of footnote number 2 with the reference to Crossroads areas and amendments to 1? Is that okay? All right, good. Making sure we got. Let's go to footnote number 3, and this is a complicated one. So footnote 3 reads, for projects adjacent to residential areas, heights and setbacks adjacent to residential areas will be determined during project review. The issue, the sentence is ambiguous, and someone could interpret this to mean that increased heights or reduced setbacks are permitted for the general commercial, administrative, and professional office and light industrial park non-residential zones. Zoning code establishes setbacks from adjoining residential uses, and figure LU2 sets height limits. For areas of the city where a specific plan or an area plan has been adopted, there are established setbacks, including those from residential neighborhoods. For example, Heart of the City specific plan and the Saratoga Sunnyvale zoning plan establish setbacks from adjacent residential development, while the South De Anza and North De Anza conceptual zoning plans include large landscape setback requirements from adjoining properties. However, if a mixed-use project is proposed in a planned development zoning district where a specific plan or an area plan has not been adopted, for example, North De Anza, while there are minimum landscape setbacks for the surface parking lots, Code Chapter 19.124, that may be applied, there are none for the buildings. This could impact the western section of the North Blaney neighborhood, abutting Apple's Infinite Loop and Mariani campus. And so the proposal, and there's multiple parts of this proposal, so I'm just going to go through A first. Amend to clarify that where a specific plan or an area plan has been adopted, there are established maximum heights and minimum setbacks from residential neighborhoods, and also state that reduced heights or increased setbacks adjacent to single-family residential areas may be required, which could only be determined during project review. So I'm going to stop here on A, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot of discussion here. A? Anyone else? Everyone okay with A?
No, I'd get rid of the second half of that. The part reading and also state that reduced heights or increased setbacks adjacent to single-family residential areas may be required, which can only be determined during project review. It's a very strange thing to say. There's a definition of there's a default definition of what those might be. You could conceivably, one thing that could happen is somebody could come in and ask for a decision that allowed their greater slope or greater height. That's always a possibility. And there's also the possibility that for some reason they maybe has to have lower height and lower slope. I'm not sure why we would say that there.
I'm going to staff. Why did we propose the language as written that way? What was the rationale, Seth?
So hopefully this gets at Commissioner Fung's comment, but I think the way it's written is such that there would be an objective standard regarding the maximum height and minimum setback for those areas, but a sort of, I'm going to call it a discretionary process would apply only if you wanted to reduce the height. There would be no opportunity to increase the height over the maximum. And the whole point of this exercise, as I understand, is to set objective standards for maximum heights and minimum setbacks. So this is not creating a discretionary process for exceeding limits. This is doing the opposite. But you look like your question was something different, perhaps.
Well, so if I were making an application here, and there is a standard that it says something, whatever it says, I'm not sure what that the second part of that statement is saying. It's telling me, although there is a standard, it may be lower than that, which is extremely unclear.
And that's fine if the commission decides it does not like that part of the sentence. That's fine. The clarity being provided here, at least our intent, was to establish an objective, non-negotiable maximum height and minimum setback. And our conclusion is that would apply as an objective standard, regardless of sort of a discretionary component of that allows you to get a lower height, but not a higher height.
You wouldn't really get an exception for a lower. I mean, it's just compliant.
No.
If it's a lower height,
it's compliant.
I'm saying that that's
and
possible to
it's-
get one, though.
Right.
That's understandable, but
Well,
at
we're not
any
gonna complain.
At any time, if something is expressed as you can build only to this maximum, you always have the option not to build. I mean, you know.
I take your point.
Right.
The Kimco Hotel is 6 inches shorter than the maximum allowable height. They don't need to have a discretionary approval to do that. Right? So I think that's why this is not necessary.
Okay, and I, if.
I like the explicit
Okay.
nature of it, though, and that's the thing. I like that, especially given what happens next to residential areas. And I think, I'm just trying to figure out, like, what the impact is by removing those statements are. So I'm thinking
Well,
through that.
but because it says that there's a.
Right, doesn't it almost introduce more ambiguity
Yeah,
in the whole
I think
thing,
so.
right? Is there a standard that by which a project should be first assessed with regard to what is that setback and maximum height? And if there isn't, then we've got a bigger problem. We need to establish what that looks like so that we can move forward in that regard. But this almost sounds like, well, we're gonna wing it.
It's possible during
Is that a
program
technical term
review. No, the problem is it says, we tell you this is the maximum height, but during program review, we may tell you it's lower than that, which, you know, I think I
Yeah, but is
understand
that
what the
more
intent was.
arbitrary?
Yeah, that
Or,
seems-
or there's the neighbor here who's really very vocal about heights, and therefore we're going to reduce the height to appease that neighbor? I mean, that's kind of almost an implication.
Commissioner Moore?
Okay, so you moved on to the second part of Proposal A. I had an issue with the first part, amend to clarify that where a specific plan or an area plan has been adopted, just stop there. And the reason I have a problem with that is when we look at policy LU 19.1, this is to do with the Balco Shopping District. It says, for specific plan, create a Balco Shopping District specific plan prior to any development on the site that lays out the land uses, design standards and guidelines, and infrastructure improvements required. So what we observed is that this language appears to have some issue with it where the specific plan could be bypassed. The creation of a specific plan could be bypassed. So I would like this language, and if we have language on any other specific plans in the general plan that is similar to this, that it could be bypassed, where a developer can say, well, I don't have to do a specific plan according to, you know, this housing law, that's discretionary, that type of thing. I would like to have that removed, but for this one, specific plan, something that says you shall create a Balco Shopping District specific plan prior to any development on the site. Just something, unless create is an actual order, what do we have to do with this policy to make sure that, you know, that you can't develop without having the specific plan? And the specific plan goes through a particular, you know, there's a process that you go through in order to arrive at it. And, the planners know what that process is, so I would like to know how we can make this definite.
Yeah.
Really, that's a question for the
staff.
legal.
And legal.
Well, because one of the possible ways that an application could be made is that I design in an area where I know it requires a specific plan, that I do a full design, negotiate it with staff, and then bring it forward where part of the approval is the approval of a specific plan that would entitle the specific, the thing that I want to build.
Okay, so the specific plan process is a public engagement process, so it would not be one that would be negotiated in a vacuum just with staff.
It's not ministerially approved, yes.
Yeah, but you can only approve that specific plan in a public hearing, which is the public process. So, yeah.
I think it's the issue
It's
when
not,
we
it's
have...
not the most desirable thing, right? You want, in a perfect world, the specific plan is written ahead of time, maybe independent of anybody owning the site or having any intention, as an expression of what you'd like to see there. But, in this very specific case, I think it was very clear. There was a plan that said, you need to have a specific plan to set the details. That specific plan was going to come with the project, with the project proposal, and that it was all going to come together.
I think that the specific plans might make a nice study session, going over the legal requirements of how a specific plan is arrived at, and the requirements that it be consistent with the general plan. I think that's something that we could, perhaps do at another time.
Okay, so for the purpose of this, where are we on footnote number 3, item A?
The way this reads is that if you have a planned development I don't really understand what the setbacks are. For instance, like when we looked at the public storage project, we didn't have any setbacks. So let's imagine that project was adjacent to some single-family homes. What setbacks would be required?
I'd like to ask a question then that's related to that. What makes a planned development district different than other districts? I think we should all be on the same page with that. If Seth or Ben, you can tell us that.
I think in general, planned development district allows for a greater mix of uses and some flexibility in design.
In the case of public storage, for instance, whatever use that building was, commercial use that building was, it had setback requirements. Those were actually called out in the plan, and then, they were adjacent, for instance, to an apartment complex.
They were all met, right?
And they were met, and then they actually exceeded them because they were using that as their catchment, right, areas. So those setback requirements exist already in the municipal plan for the individual components, and those you would have to follow those by default for a ministerial approval. You'd have to follow those by default. If you wanted to say, I would like to be able to move my commercial building right next to,
have to come
yeah,
to us.
then that becomes a discretionary approval as part of the P zone approval.
Okay, so looking back at public storage, that was light industrial residential with 25 dwelling units per acre. So if you were to break out the either part, the light industrial or the residential component, those probably have different zoning and setback requirements, which they're probably not very similar. So I think if we're going to discuss that, we should probably pull out, what's the difference between if it's the light industrial zoning there, what setbacks would they have needed to do, and what would they have had for residential at that site.
Yeah, I think that was actually alluded to elsewhere in this document, where there's a discussion about, commercial area may be regulated by setbacks for parking, but not by some of the other things which you would refer to in a residential. I think we're not intending to change it's not the intent of this exercise to change what the individual component zoning is. And there isn't any override. There's no override that's happening here where you can override the functions that are there already. I like the first part of this, the first half of the statement, although, it's almost to get in that category of things you don't need to say.
Well, I'd almost like for plan development zoning to suggest that you go with the more restrictive zoning requirements of the individual components that are in that plan development district. So in the case of the light industrial residential, you would go with whichever between the two was more restrictive. And that would be setting the setbacks.
Does that make sense versus the actual use of the project? That would be a question that I would raise from the standpoint of if you look at the storage project, right? It's definitely, there's that one unit for the manager, but I would say that it's a storage facility, so therefore, if it's mixed, I agree, you'd look at all the requirements but I wouldn't interpret that as a mixed use, really, the storage project. So therefore, I'd say it's more light industrial, and those are the requirements that should apply. So, having said that, it is kind of a project by project assessment. So I think part of this whole element of trying to tighten things up is really comes down to the staff's interpretation of what this project looks like, and are they. It's been my experience, generally speaking, that the staff looks to interpret projects in the element that is more favorable to residents because they are looking to get things approved and alter projects before they come to us, working with the applicant to take care of those issues that they see as, hey, this is going to be a problem. It's not going to pass because of this. You're asking for a height exception. You're asking for this or other elements. I think the staff really works pretty hard to try to mitigate those elements and gain concessions from the applicant that will take take a project and make it passable, if you will.
I think if we're going back to looking at, we're trying to avoid ministerial approvals by these by right ministerial approvals that are coming from these 200 housing bills that are coming through, then I would go with a more restrictive zoning and have that have it need to be negotiated to something less restrictive afterwards. So it really depends on what the objective of this exercise is. So if we want to be more restrictive,
right.
and this is a quick and easy way to get more restrictive really fast.
I would couch it in a different way. I would say that because the way these 200 housing bills are being set up and the gut and amend process is going on in bills, that whatever we put in our general plan may be the only set of standards we end up with that goes to ministerial approval.
Right,
and
but
to get some local control back, we probably need to think about where we need to put restrictions so that we can get the concessions that we need.
Right, but a lot of the legislation is aimed at local entities creating restrictions specifically to restrict housing. So I think there's a slippery slope here, if you will, from the standpoint of what we're talking about is exactly, generally speaking, what the state sees as a big problem with regard to dealing with the housing crisis, is local governments becoming, okay, I'm going to change my general plan to make it so restrictive, you can't build anything, right? And so that's what we have to avoid in terms of that perception, right?
I think
and so,
the intent here is not to restrict housing, but to reduce the office to housing imbalance that occurs if not properly applied.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's and I'm not speaking for all of you, but I believe that many of us here want to increase the amount of housing that's available and the amount of BMR housing that's available, but we do not want the office that's coming through with it, and we have to think about ways to be able to build housing without having to be stuck with office.
Yeah, I think I would like to reiterate that. This conflation of housing with offices is perhaps the biggest challenge. Coming down to Measure D, which started the whole drama, none of Sandel's material actually talked about the 2 million or whatever square foot of office was included in that. And that's where much of the challenge comes. So I think we should refrain from assigning attribution or motives when we just, all we want to do is make sure our standards are well laid out and consistent with the way we want the city to look, regardless of whether you have a specific plan or a state mandated plan or whatever. So let's keep any attribution of intent out of this discussion.
Right, well, we keep using the word restrictive, and just by using that word, we're already going down a certain path, right? So I'm not making any type of judgment other than pointing out what I think is
That's why I'm trying to be
right?
clear in the nuances. There should be amount of local control to ensure more affordable housing in the way that the locality wants to. And I believe that's what is happening here, with no intention of trying to restrict housing or restrict office buildings or anything in that sense. It's about making sure that the city meets its obligations.
Yes, and so as a counterpoint to that, many of the things that are being discussed here have the effect of lowering the building density, and that has the effect of hampering the ability to build affordable housing, which is exactly why many of these bills are coming through. Now, I don't actually believe there are bills that streamline the construction of office, right?
Yeah, but that's what
I disagree with that.
Disagree.
So in the situation with public storage, it had 25 dwelling units per acre. If they wanted to have built housing at that location, they could have taken a concession for the setbacks, the residential setbacks that we're discussing, and when they would use the density bonus law and add on another 35% to that property.
And they would not been able to build housing because we have a piece of our general plan that says you can't build unless you're an approved housing element.
And so you do a
Right.
general
Well,
plan.
And I've asked them to
well as-
remove that, right? But
So you do a
Well,
general
you
plan
make the
amendment
adjustment
and
at that point. You don't have to remove the entire housing amendment. You can just make an adjustment at that point. You don't have to get rid of the whole thing in the allocation table. That doesn't make any sense, right? The whole point is we have an opportunity to retain local control, to support the housing initiatives in the manner that we see fit, and we should take every measure to do that. And sometimes that comes in concessions, and sometimes that comes in, how we state how this general plan is going to look.
So I would come back, I would say, I think our goal here tonight is to reduce ambiguity within the existing framework. I think that the phase one the items identified, there's, with the exception of item 2, I think they're valid ambiguities, right? And then to try to make an overlay here, so one of the things that has to happen is, if there are issues in the general plan, there are actually policy decisions in the general plan that you would probably have to make these kind of changes. That's a separate thing, and that's where the issue is. I mean,
So, any other comments?
so I think the thing that we keep running into is we have existing laws. We can make small changes that make them unambiguous, but we seem to want to add in a thing that says, well, don't forget that 1-to-1 slope ratio. That is unnecessary.
It's important sometimes to be explicit, though.
It's important to the structure. We're putting a careful eye to this to make sure that when we say, when we set the default at 1-to-1, and we say use the default here, that actually happens, right? You don't need to repeat it in every place, right? And you don't want to, because someday it may not be 1-to-1.
Right, and if you make a change, you have to find it everywhere because you'll start to create inconsistencies.
Find and
But-
replace.
Right.
So under Proposal A, the language that they have is reduced heights or increased setbacks adjacent to single-family residential areas may be required. I would prefer we used the word will, which could only be determined during project review, which will only be determined during project review. There's something about, I don't like that
If it's
we've got may
determined
and
during
could.
project review, isn't that a discretionary decision?
And then if you're in a discretionary decision area, you're then subject to, like with SB 35, and they're yeah.
We should be clear that it should well be required. I mean, is there anything wrong with it?
Yeah, there is.
Why? Why don't you like that?
We set a maximum height. You're allowed to build to the maximum height. That is an objective standard. To say you're allowed to build to a maximum height unless a lower height applies is pretty ridiculous
And relatively arbitrary.
and extremely arbitrary. It doesn't say, if it said you might be subject to being 5 feet shorter, that's at least slightly less arbitrary. But overall, it makes no sense.
What it's saying is that if you're next to a residential area, you apply the law towards the residential area requirements as opposed to what's in that specific plan. Wouldn't you interpret it that way?
No.
I would.
If there's a specific plan that says this is what you do next to a residential area, then that's what you do.
But we're
That's
not
what the
talking
first
about
step
that. We're
says.
talking about scenarios where there are no specific plan. That's the point.
If there's no specific plan, then there's a default.
Right.
well,
And that also is unambiguous.
Okay, so in the issue.
You're protecting against the case where somebody somehow says, there's no specific plan, therefore, there's no limit on how much height I can build. That doesn't exist. That case
Excuse me,
doesn't exist.
Chair Wong, will you recognize the speaker so we can have a little more organization?
I will do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore, please go ahead.
Okay, so under issues, how it says, however, if a mixed-use project is proposed in a planned development zoning district where a specific plan or an area plan has not been adopted, and their example is North De Anza, but we have also Balco.
Balco.
Right? While there are minimum landscape setbacks for surface parking lots that may be applied, there are none for buildings. And then they go on and just talk about the North Blaney neighborhood, but we are getting we are affected by that in the Valco specific plan area, and that was going back to item 1 even, I was asking to have the language improved for the Valco specific plan, that it is not an option, that you cannot develop if there is no specific plan adopted, that's not, make it so it's not an option.
Commissioner Fung, go ahead.
I don't think you're developing until you're getting a permit, right? And that.
But who
so
issues the permit?
You had to pass a specific plan, and you have to submit a proposal, and those both have to get approved. Both
Through
the
whom?
public-
Who approves those?
Those are both under normal process. Those would normally be approved right here.
What about under abnormal processes that are being shoved down our throat? What happens at that moment?
So
Then you have to be compliant with
Commissioner, Wong, I have to say this. Sometimes your choice of language is very unhelpful. I just wanted to make that note. You tend to start to politicize what we're trying to accomplish, and I really feel strongly that we need to avoid that. So having something shoved down our throat, I think, is not an appropriate term for the Planning Commission. Just my.
I recognize your point there. I will still stick to it because that's what's happening to us. But I will. I recognize your point.
that is.
Were
and
you
from-
referring to the state laws, or?
The state laws, yeah, the state laws that are coming through. So.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so what happened with regards to the SB 35 project is that and you can stop me anytime, is that the claim was that no specific plan needed to be adopted. Yes, within the project application, that's how they worded it. And then what they got from that is that because there was no height limit for the table LU1, I believe. LU2? Okay, it's the allocations table in the footnote. There's no height requirement, so then we ended up with the very large towers.
So first of all, I object. I don't think that you can make that comment in the context of the discussion because your involvement in the Friends of Beta Cupertino suit against the SB 35 approval. So just for the record, I'm concerned about a conflict there. But even then, I'll say I think the city council at the time that these general plan was adopted made a bad choice. My interpretation made a bad choice to leave things open the way they did. They did that with a clear intent that they said at the time, which was, we want to see, go develop a plan, go develop a proposal, and when you bring that back to us, that's when we will either approve or not approve things like height and allocation.
But
right?
Commissioner Fung, that's wonderful in a normal process. We don't have normal processes anymore. So what do we do in a situation when you don't have normal processes? Just let it go, not set a limit, not do anything, not be explicit? Is that what you're trying to say here?
No, absolutely not. There was an error on the part of the council.
Okay, so let's fix this. Let's fix this now. That's why we're doing this.
You're not fixing, but that's not the problem you're fixing.
Well, what's the problem
There's
you're
no
fixing,
lack,
Commissioner Fung?
there is no ambiguity about what does the R3 section of a P-zone look like.
Well, why not get rid of P-zones then?
What?
Why not get rid of P-zones and put them back and go back through the process? Redesignate all the P-zones.
Actually, before we go ahead, I had actually a question for our city
Commissioner
attorney,
Saxena, go ahead.
city attorney about the lawsuit and Commissioner Fung's comment about what Commissioner Mood could say or not say. So could you just dwell on that just so that we're all clear about what is appropriate in this context?
If I apologize that it's sort of a if I hear it, I know it sort of situation. So there isn't a clear line in the law.
But at this moment, we're okay. Were we okay? Is that what you're saying?
If everything so far has been fine, I would prefer that we try to stick to the agenda and not discuss specifics about certainly the lawsuit, also the applied for SB 35 project. I will also say I think it's just perhaps a waste of the Commission's time at this point because, as you all know, the Council has already given direction on the 18th regarding a proposed general plan amendment for that area, which will come before this Commission and back to the Council. And if you spend time dwelling on this issue, you may just have to do more work in the future. I would recommend that you focus on the document before you.
Commissioner Saxena, Commissioner Fung.
One follow-up question.
Commissioner Moore, sorry.
Sorry. Sorry, just because I just want to
I was going that way.
would it be okay, like in the context of this discussion where we're discussing what will happen if we do it and if we don't do it, would it be okay for Commissioner Moore to talk about the particular approval, even if she's part of the litigation, to say what can go right or wrong based on what action it is, when we're trying to give an example?
Well, once again, unfortunately, stating what I'm going to say, Commissioner Moore, may think about what happened with the SB 35 process regarding Balco may be a legal opinion that was stated in the papers, and it's hard to determine what is an objective and what is a subjective issue in this instance.
Let's use a hypothetical.
I think it's in the city's interest and all the commissioners' interest to not discuss those matters.
Let's use a hypothetical, okay? I mean, new project, empty lot somewhere, designated as a SBXX project, comes through that requires ministerial approval. What happens in this scenario, right? That's probably a better way to describe this. Commissioner Moore.
May we add that this hypothetical project requires a specific plan, and it would need major architectural site review for the permit. So it would be a major development, and it would need a permit.
I think we're
Is that
rapidly heading back into the
Okay.
zone that's not okay.
All right. Then just go to the first part. It needs to have a specific plan, and that just goes back to what I'd really like to see is that if we have sites that require a specific plan, I'd really like to see it that you cannot get. You can't develop the site like we have in the policy that I read earlier, that you can't develop the site clearly without having the specific plan created. and that you're following that specific
Are you saying you
plan.
can't have a plan designation or just develop that site?
No, if you have a site that says, like, here's our example, we've got the, it says if a mixed-use project is proposed in a plan development zoning district where a specific plan or an area plan has not been adopted, for example, North De Anza, okay? So while there are minimum landscape setbacks for surface parking lots that may be applied, there are none for buildings. So I would like it for us to be saying that it's not an option for you to develop that site without a specific plan. And it looks to me that the general plan's intention was that there would be a specific plan. So is there some way that we can word it so that this issue doesn't happen, and that gets rid of the requirement to do this proposal A, for example, where we don't even need to do that?
It's a question for staff, I guess. What is the trigger point for the specific plan in a project? That's why I ask, because I don't know.
That's a good question. Are you looking for triggers, like in terms of height, in terms of design, or what?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, what is it that says, okay, this is a piece of, let's just say it's vacant lot, which there
Vacant
are
lot, vacant lot.
little,
Very few.
very
Okay,
few.
very few.
And
gonna put
there's
it-
a project, and it's compliant with the general plan. It's compliant with all elements, height, setbacks, et cetera. What would trigger the need for a specific plan on that particular project?
I think it would, depending on the elements of the project, if allowing some level of discussion or flexibility to the project.
So if for example, they wanted an exception potentially,
Right.
would okay.
Would it be fair to characterize that as a kind of a superversion of the P-zone, right? There was an intention with the development of this area that may differ from the existing characteristics.
I don't know what a super version of P-zone is, but I see your point. So
Yeah.
I would say,
Or-
I would say
or-
to that point, yeah. I guess.
Maybe another way to ask that question would be the LU2 land use map identifies a number of special plan areas, right? And those are identified for some reason. Generally speaking, they are areas of higher intensity development. That's what it's called out as. And I believe that a specific plan version would be, a similar thought process with potentially a higher level of modification. Is that a reasonable characterization?
Sure.
I don't know if there's anything else to add here, but my only objection in this item is just C. I want to get rid of the form-based code option in here. I don't think that belongs here, so.
I, of course, love that one.
I know you do. I know you do. It's okay, but I want to get rid of that.
No, I think that there's a problem. The challenge that comes in making an objective plan that works. If you look at almost every case of where people find that there's a problem, it's a problem that has to do with the scale of development. And that can even be just on a relatively small, when you're building 15-unit apartment building, the rules are quite different. The rules that make sense are quite different than when you're building a sixplex, right? And I think that's actually where we run into problems. So you have to come up with a way to express that. You can say, I want to have, one of the pieces here had an R4 zone from Mountain View, which is a slightly larger apartment building than what we define here. And then you could potentially say, okay, now what is the zoning for an apartment building that has 400 units, right? You could define all these things explicitly. By the time you start to do that, that's when going to a form-based model will improve improve the functionality of what you're making. So, I continue. I actually tagged this item because although I agree with the sentiment there, I didn't understand how that could be in phase one. So, the idea of saying we ought to do that is a phase one thing, but actually doing it is not. So, I have a little bit of a complaint there.
Commissioner Moore?
I would like to have the specific plan areas outlined more clearly. I'm seeing, let's see, on PDF 40 of the land use, element of the general plan. We've got special areas mentioned, and then I'll just read it. They're located along major mixed-use corridors and nodes that have access to a variety of different forms of transportation. Future growth in Cupertino will be focused in these areas to manage growth while minimizing traffic, greenhouse gas, and health impacts on the community. The discussion for each special area outlines goals, policies, and strategies related to land use, building form, streetscape, connectivity, open space, landscaping, and the urban-rural ecosystem in order to help implement the community vision for these areas. And then they talk about Heart of the City Special Area, Policy LU 13-1, Heart of the City Specific Plan, which already exists. So there's one. Next, West Stevens Creek Boulevard Sub-Area. Does that have a specific plan that goes along with it? I'm going to go with no.
That's actually that's part of the heart of the city.
Okay, so Crossroads sub-area, part of the city.
Crossroads.
Got it, okay.
There are five.
And then
five
city center
sub-areas.
sub-area, okay. Central, okay, got the sub-areas. So past the sub-areas, Balco Shopping District special area. So now we've got another specific plan area. So how many do we have? Is it just Balco and, well, we've got, so we do Crossroads?
Crossroads
I mean,
part
Heart of the City, Balco, North Valco Park Special Area.
We have 8, right?
Right. So I would.
The special areas are not specific plans.
No.
So it's only, it would only be, the only requirements right now are heart of the city and Valco.
But this mentions North Dianza.
North Dianza, so the discussion there made reference to
Or an area plan.
an area plan, which is.
Okay, so now we've got two things. What's an area plan?
Yeah. So there were things like master plans that were done.
Right.
There was a Valco, South Valco master plan that was done in preparation for Main Street. Those are not legally binding, although they are guidance documents. And I believe that's what is being referred to here on North Dianza. Only
I wonder why it was not legally binding.
in state law, only general plan and specific plan go through the full, public vetting process and have the full force of law.
And who let that happen?
Well, master plan identifies what are the things you're trying to. The park master plan isn't trying to say, here's what the parks will look. Here are the plans. You can go work. Go remodel the park now. It's saying, what are the goals that we're trying to accomplish here?
Long-term vision.
Yeah.
Would we want to no longer use these area plans and have them moved over to the requirement that they have a specific plan rather than an area plan or a master plan or any of these
simplify
plans
things.
that, well, okay, you could, the question is if it's not like legally binding because it's not a real specific plan, what good is it if we were faced with, an SB 35 project? I'm just wondering, and especially given
I think it's
North
actually more
Danza.
protective because under those cases, only the defaults would apply. So the kinds of things you do when you make a North Dianza special plan is that will typically be, I will allow you to increase height, I will allow you to have less setback, those sorts of things. And those would not be available to you if you just had
That doesn't sound right, but explain that again to me. So.
Normally the reason to have a plan, whether it's master plan or, you go farther and have a specific plan is that there is a default of development intensity. And traditionally, it is when things have a higher intensity than the default, that's when you have a plan.
Doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I mean, density is one aspect. There could be other exceptions people want. But yes, so in general, when you're going for a specific plan, you do want the city to, in some way, override the general plan to come up with something specific which they specifically approve, which is not like a binding precedent which can be used by other people. I think that's probably is one reason why you go for a specific plan.
I don't know, I suspect, the park master plan, not legally binding, did have a environmental impact report, although it is a different kind of report because they are not being specific about what they're trying to do. So I suspect that that's actually part of this that's tied as well. You know, there isn't an EIR for the South Valco master plan, but there will be an EIR, you know, if you have an area where the development is such that, you know, it's high intensity, even if it's over a long period of time, you know, that would normally be something where, again, you, just like the general plan would require, general plan modification is going to require an EIR, you know, the specific plan likely will too. I mean, you know, they can make an, you know, they can make a determination that that's not required, but it's unlikely. I actually have a great deal of concern, you know, the context of the discussion, which looked to reduce density in the Valco zone, the council discussion, you know, could very easily trigger a situation where you need to do a new EIR before you can pass any of this stuff. Right?
Commissioner Moore?
Okay, so going back to policy LU 19.1 regarding Valco, it says the specific plan, and then there's no extra word there, create a Valco shopping district specific plan prior to any development on the site that lays out the land uses, design standards and guidelines, and infrastructure improvements required. So my ask is to strengthen this language for this specific plan and also for the North Dianza. Actually, no, you're saying that North Dianza is an area plan. So what the other specific plan area we have is?
Heart of the city.
Heart of the city, okay. And that one is already complete. So our only, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's an adopted plan. It's always subject to change, but yeah, it's adopted plan.
Yes, you can amend you can amend that specific plan at any time. Okay, so my ask is that this is made concrete so that anyone reading this there's no ambiguity about whether they need to adopt the specific plan before any development.
So I just want to be clear that this was I believe it's this very provision that will be the subject of a general plan amendment, and on the 18th, the council discussed its recommendation, which I believe is option 2 for moving forward with that amendment, which would remove the office allocation and go with the current 389 unit allocation at the site by right without approval of a specific plan. And if you wanted to go over and above that, you would apply for a specific plan. So any changes proposed tonight to this provision may be irrelevant in light of the other action that's being taken.
Okay, so can we then mention that, you know, with regards, so basically they're flying without a specific plan. Is that right?
I think the way you described it, that would be without a specific plan, and that would not be allowable under the general plan. There must be
a general plan amendment, which is what they're discussing.
Well, the general plan requires there be a specific plan.
They're amending the general plan, was my understanding, based on
to take out the requirement for a specific
That's my
plan.
understanding based on the June 18 meeting.
Okay, so what you're saying is that policy LU 19.1 is not ambiguous, that they have to do a specific plan for Valco.
I think so, yeah. I think that the thing is, before you can stick a shovel in the ground, you have to have permit, you have to have an approved project, and if those things happen, if the approval of a specific plan and a project, you know, and then accepting a project into review happened simultaneously, you know, happened in the same meeting or in very quick succession, that would be compliant with the intention of the general plan. That was clearly the intention of the council.
Again, in light of the litigation and the fact that the council is already taking action on this item, I suggest we move off of this policy, which is not specifically called out in the documents that staff prepared, and discuss the proposals that are in the attachment.
So how do we handle exception? If like, let's say I want to get rid of C, Commissioner Fung loves C, you know, we have, like, how do we roll on this, right? Like, do we take this individually here? Like, what do we
To
do?
me, it sounded like he had concerns Commissioner Fung, in terms of it being more of a.
But you wanted it in
assess
phase two, right?
two.
No, well, just, it's not actionable as a phase one item, other than to say.
Okay, so you'll move it to phase two, and we'll all be happy at this
Well-
moment.
I agree with that. I have it crossed out on my suggestions.
Okay, so
The removal of item C entirely, I don't want this.
I think I hear you. I think we have two commissioners that don't prefer the way this C is. Again, it's not a proposed language, right? We're just proposing some discussion for that particular item. So we could move C off to phase two for sort of future discussion.
Yeah, I mean, for form-based code, like from what I have read and understood, many cities have started about 3%, and they typically keep both the form and the other one around. My concern is that right now we're still struggling with getting a basic code streamlined. Whether the city and the planning commission and the city council even has the bandwidth to start looking at a form-based code, while we're still trying to dot the i's and cross the t's. So, I mean, I would be supportive of keeping form-based discussion out till the dust settles on what we want to do with a general plan and a general code.
Yeah, I'll wait for you to convince me. How's that?
Yeah. So I guess the way, if you could record my comment as, I believe, I agree with the intent of what you're saying there. I think that ultimately will be the best way to address the issues in this point. However, because you're not intending to bring a form-based code in phase one, I don't have a problem with removing that.
Okay, so it still leaves us with A and B. Where are we at this point, everybody?
Okay, so with regards to specific plans, we have an understanding that they would happen, so we don't need to add the words will into item A, as far as I can tell.
So we're keeping staff's language for item A.
Yeah, did we decide on the latter part of
Yeah, the latter part of it.
Yeah.
I think we should get rid of the latter. I continue to believe we should get rid of the latter part. I don't really see the point. I do think, on the first part, what we are saying is not that something must have, that this or that or the other thing must have a specific plan. We're saying if a specific plan exists, then we'll follow those rules. And that's a pretty clean statement.
Commissioner Moore?
I think after looking at the Stevens Creek urban villages and the way that they pushed the setbacks up against some single-story and two-story residential homes, that I would definitely want to keep the ending sentence, reduced heights or increased setbacks adjacent to single-family residential areas may be required, which could only be determined during project review. I want to have that in there. We've seen this go very poorly, where they could essentially make a staircase of a building, very close to the single-family homes, and then going up to 85 feet. And I don't think that that's what the residents here are going to want to see happen.
So that this is actually one of the items in the Tier 2 discussion, in the Tier 2 points, about what happens when you're on the edge of a city boundary. There's no jurisdiction. You can't control what happens on the other side. You can decide, on your side, that I want to put a restriction because of an adjacent neighborhood, but you can't do anything to the other side. So
we're not talking about another city. This is all in Cupertino. So that for this example, I think in the phase two, it was talking about the 95-foot high hotel at the corner of Stern and Stevens Creek Boulevard, and then also what I brought up, the Stevens Creek urban villages adjacent to Arata Way. So I don't really think that applies to this example, because this is all within our city boundaries.
I'd like to keep that in there, and I'm still kind of want to say will be required, but that's, I'm going to give up on the well here. So.
Then I would ask that we put in similar wording that says greater heights and less setback could happen, based on the program review, on project review. It really is no different.
Those could be taken as concessions if the developer is really, truly interested in developing housing, because then they would be putting in, the maximum dwelling units allowed at a particular site, getting the density bonus on top of that. They can even go for a city density bonus if they went for 100% affordable. The city can then, give them even a greater density, and then they can get those concessions on the setback and height after they make those, get through those hoops, and then they can have them.
Yes. So that's no different.
Oh, no, it's very different, because if you give them the ability to go up, right off the bat in that language, that's very different than saying reduced. You're giving
So
an opportunity for
we're
concession.
not saying what the characteristics are that cause the maximum height to be reduced in that passage.
We really don't want to be giving away these concessions for a mixed-use development with a little bit of housing, where they're really,
Housing
playing around
becomes a
with the numbers.
concession instead of not being the main point. We don't want to be in that situation.
So I still don't see how that supports, how, I understand the concern. I just don't think that that's reflected in that text.
Does anyone have a suggestion for how we can move off of this particular topic?
We're only on the footnotes, folks.
How about something along the lines of the implication with reduced heights and increased setbacks is you're trying to reduce the scale at the right. So something that more is addressing that element. Some wording that specifically, in terms of during project review, adjacent elements such as setbacks and heights will be carefully vetted, something like that. Because I think we all know what the intent is and what we want to happen, and I respect Commissioner Fung's point of it should be part of the code as we have it. However, we know that exceptions can be granted based on what the project is asking for in terms of whether or not it's high density and BMR housing and what that does to this project. So anyway, just a thought. We could word it that way.
May I offer a legal perspective? Since
Please
we
do.
helped
Please do.
draft this? So I'll take a second stab at trying to explain what we were trying to do with this language. So right now, you'll see in the existing column, it's totally open-ended, right?
Yep.
Heights and setback, I think we all agree. So what we were trying to do here is establish, if you're going through a ministerial process where no discretion is allowed, there is a set maximum height and minimum setback that you cannot exceed, period. Right. But you don't want that to always be the case where you are not proceeding under an SB 35 project or other ministerial process, but where you have a discretionary project proposed, you want staff and the commission and the council to be able to reduce those. And so that's why we've put in may reduce in the event that a project going through the normal process is proposed. Our legal analysis is that second part of the sentence does not take away from the objectivity of the first part, because it's clear that the first part always applies no matter what if you're in a ministerial process, except that if you're in a discretionary process, staff or the commission or the council has discretion here. My concern with changing may in the second part to will is that it turns the whole thing into a discretionary standard, and then you have nothing. You're back to what it says in the first column, in the event an SB 35 project is applied for.
Or any ministerial review process.
You're right, right.
Any ministerial. Take
Right.
SB 35 out of it. Okay, I'll buy that. I'll go with you on that. Okay.
Concur, that's fine.
Okay. Are we on agreement on A now?
Still don't,
With some
I still don't think so.
exceptions.
I still don't think so. What are the circumstances under which height would be reduced? Exercising that part of the wording.
I don't know. I don't know. But I don't think that matters.
I really believe it shouldn't be there.
Okay.
This is one of those,
Yeah.
if we have a section that says, without a discretionary review, then the defaults the established defaults apply. That's fine. And then then we're kind of saying if there's a discretionary review, then anything could happen, including this, but also including increase in height, right?
No.
Right, so what's the point of the language?
No, it only says reduced, we made sure to say reduced height or increased setbacks, not increased heights or reduced setbacks. You can only go down.
So
And-
in the past, there was no limit to what the council might approve under discretionary approval. And you would be appearing to limit that here.
That's correct. That is
That's
correct.
that's what we're looking for.
That is correct.
That's right.
That's exactly correct.
In a
Really-
full discretionary approval, I don't know why there would be a limit one way or the other.
This is protecting the residential homes that would be adjacent to these planned development zoning districts. And, you know, referring to the Stevens Creek Urban Villages, well, I'll just give a generic. Okay, let's say they want to do a one-to-one setback from the rear property line, and the adjacent single-family home has maybe a 25-foot setback, but the developer wants to do a one-to-one from the property line, and their first floor is 10 feet high, so now their setback is 10 feet. And because they need to keep the building under the one-to-one line, they then go 10 feet into their property, 10 feet up, then step in another 10 feet and up, and there we keep going, and there you have a staircase of up to 85 feet in that particular example, all glowing at night and looking into the little 1 or 2 story residential home. And that would be the kind of thing that we would want to have the negotiation ability to not occur.
Put a light on top of the Luxor.
But if the height in that area were 45 feet, you could still have 4 feet, 4 floors built in that form, and you're allowing that. I mean, you are. Another issue here, I think, would be that you posited before, what if a developer chose to build a very favorable affordable housing development? This would remove their ability for that to be tall, adjacent to the residential area, because they would not have the discretion at that point. No,
But council would have discretion if they want to.
No, they don't have discretion. That was the intention of that line.
No, if they were doing that affordable housing, they would get concessions
Yep.
to be able to do that. And that, the way the density bonus law is written, that is exactly how it goes.
And they'll get a
there's-
height concession for it as well.
Right, height and setback. Those are that's in the state law, and we cannot
We can't override that.
do anything about it.
Well, you can't, yes, but those rules also apply on a ministerial approval.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure exactly what it is that you think you're buying here, other than the reducing the power of the city council to decide the form of something that may be built.
I trust our city attorney's judgment on this item.
Does anyone else have any other objectives on this, other input on this and objections or any kind of proponents of this? Otherwise, we're going to move on. So, I'd like to move on. I'd like to move on. We have your comments. Footnote number 4.
Oh, well,
Oh,
we didn't
whoa.
do B yet.
We didn't do B yet? I
No.
thought we were okay with B.
No,
No,
B.
we're not okay with B.
No, I'm curious what it is.
B, yeah.
There was something specifically being mentioned here about the east side of the North Deanza conceptual plan. I've actually never seen it, but I assume it exists somewhere, right? And this looks like this must have something to do with things near the Infinite Loop campus being redeveloped. So I would just say, it wasn't clear to me what it is. There was a trying to strike consistency between the east and west side of North Deanza. It's not clear why that was to me.
Well, it says implementation of consistent landscape easements on both sides of Deanza Boulevard. I would assume that that's about aesthetics of the landscaping on the boulevard.
Staff, what is that? Just so we have a clear reading of that?
Yeah, there must be something there.
Because I thought that was that as well, but
Maybe my understanding here is too simple, but really it's just to ensure a consistency with how the landscape easement is being applied and implemented.
So why is that really?
Why is that here?
That seems strange.
I mean, you're almost making a general plan amendment. It's almost coming to that level. To force the landscaping to look the same on both sides of North De Anza Boulevard.
So if the commission disagrees, we can certainly take that item out, right?
Yeah. I would ask that we strike that. I think that.
I would, sorry.
I think that.
My apologies.
the North De Anza conceptual plan, it must say something. If there's a reason that it's different on the two sides.
Commissioner Amor?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we need to look at a map on this before we make some sort of
Right, I agree.
judgments about it.
Right. Yeah, none of us know what this looks like,
Yeah.
so.
I'll just say, as it was explained to me, and I have to admit, this is a very rudimentary explanation, because I wasn't around when this was adopted, but evidently only the west side of the plan has actually been adopted or implemented, and the east side has not been pulled into the conceptual plan, and so this is seeking consistency, basically completing the plan or pulling the east side of that area into the plan.
So I would say that if both sides of De Anza Boulevard are supposed to be part of that plan, then I don't think it should take any additional action other than just say, send us a proposal for bringing the west side. So I don't think this is something that rises to the level. In particular, this one jumped out at me because of the very, very high specificity.
Yeah, very specific.
Do you want to take away the B?
I
wanna keep the B?
actually, I want to keep it, yeah. I think there's probably a good reason it's here, and I
Right,
wouldn't
so I
argue with
think
it.
we need clarification and understanding why is it here, seems to me.
I'm okay with moving that to phase 2. You guys okay with that?
Well,
Or getting clarification when it comes back.
Yeah, clarification when it comes
Yeah,
back is fine
right.
with me.
Okay,
All right.
let's note that. B, Heart of the City Special Area Text Box.
Wait, where are you at? BBB.
And I just got a general question. I mean, when do we engage the public on any comments? Do we have to go through this whole list, or do we make everyone sit through this?
Well, that was the direction that the chair that the commission had agreed on as you go through this item, right? Because typically you would receive presentation, right? You ask questions, and then you open for public comment.
Yep.
And then you come back to your deliberation. We're kind of a hybrid of
We're hybrid, I know.
question
That's why-
and
That's
deliberation.
what I'm
So,
asking. Is this a good point to stop and then get comments, and then come back to B?
You're actually on footnote 4.
Once we get through
Yeah,
4 is what I'm
footnote
saying.
4.
I'm saying process-wise. So I want to make sure we get public and comments, and let's do that, if you guys are okay with it, if there's any public comments. And then After we finish A. So, okay. Footnote 4. My only question here, actually, is North Balco Gateway, North Balco Parkway, I don't know which one is which, so, I mean, what's it supposed to be called?
There is a North Balco Gateway,
Yes,
which is,
part of
it's effectively that shopping center, the Cupertino.
99 Ranch?
Yeah.
Cupertino Village, yeah.
Right. And then there is a North Balco developed area, which is where Apple Park and
Hamptons is,
are.
yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way it's drawn on the map, I believe.
Okay, so Commissioner Wong, is the issue that it's being called North and South Falco Park areas, and then when you look at the LU2 map, it's called North Valco Gateway, and then,
There's no North Falco Park on there, but I guess it's intentional, I
right,
guess.
so
There's
the
no
language
sense
should
in
match.
I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
no.
No, there is. Yeah. No, there isn't.
No, there isn't, that's my point.
Yeah. There
There-
were
there-
errors on a couple of those.
Okay, so, well, you've got a couple things.
So
You've
that's the
got-
old map.
Okay, so you've got
Wait, that's the old map?
you have North Valco Gateway, North Valco Park
what was sent to us,
Special
isn't it?
Area,
That's the old.
and
Where's the name?
then a South Valco. This is really difficult.
Oh, I got a good question, okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Fung made a good point. This is the old map that was sent to us. If that's the case, what's the new map?
The reference, what they did was they sent LU2 from the
Part of the city plan?
No, from the current general plan for reference,
This one?
because the comments, the textual comments, yeah, the textual comments referred to changes that would ripple to that LU2 map. But, we weren't looking at the final LU2 map.
So we were sent the wrong LU2 plan, is what you're telling, map is what you're saying? Or not the
Well, I don't
updated
know.
one? I don't know where you're
They're the same. The one that's in the general plan and the one that we got is the same. I believe that's actually what the staff report says. You have that for reference, right? So,
I'm not sure what the confusion is. This is the map from the general plan. Is there
Yeah.
a different
Is there
understanding?
a different one that we should have?
no. People are asking, where's the new one? And that would come in a future meeting. right?
Correct. This map is the existing general
Yeah,
plan.
okay.
This does not
Okay,
incorporate
so we're
anything.
using the right plan, is what I want to make
Yeah.
sure. But then, Commissioner Moore, you got something to add?
It seems that, technically our general plan is the approved city council document from December 4th, 2014, plus the amendment that occurred October 2015, that those two documents together are the actual general plan.
But we don't have a clean version of that?
The later one, the 2015 one, is the clean version.
I know, is that the one we're looking at right now?
Yeah.
Well, they were not combined. What we're seeing online is not those two documents.
Can we have staff check to see if that's correct and update the general plan as it should be, if we don't have that?
I have a feeling this is actually
This is the updated
part of the litigation. I don't know if we should even be discussing this right now. I mean,
well,
whatever's before you is the document we're discussing tonight.
Well, okay, so I don't know about that, but I do know the draft EIR references both of those other documents that you had for the Valco specific plan. I've looked at them both, and I don't see differences. I don't know what if it's just mincing words about it, but they do look a little bit different. So I'm just mentioning that.
So we've got two versions of a general plan at this moment, or we have,
We have one version of a general plan.
okay,
I think any statement that's not the case is just not, there was a process that went through to say, these are the changes that were identified, there was a red line that was done, clarifications. There were a number of things like the plan areas were redrawn, they're represented in a different form, and that's the 2015 general plan. And the document we got, just for reference, was from that 2015. So on this one, that's why I have a comment on this item. There's a historical, I don't know, there's a kind of historical mess. This also showed up again in the Phase 2 section. The Valco Shopping District was part of the South Valco area in the 2005 general plan. They were separated in the 2014 general plan. The interesting thing is that by that separation, it should probably be a 1.5 to 1 slope, because it's certainly the case that if you remove the reverse reference, that was the Phase 2 thing was that the Valco Shopping Center, shopping district should move, should become either part of heart of the city or out of the South Valco plan, and that in fact, or revert to its prior before December 4th, 2014. That actually would put it at 1.5 to 1 slope. So I think this one probably should go just on the. There's the simple thing, the parenthetical reference. I don't think there's anything wrong with removing it. They are separate things. They have separate, and the Valco one is ambiguous at this time. But the specific things talking about what is and isn't South Valco, the shopping center used to be. It is in the master plan. It is clearly treated as part of the South Valco zone.
when did it get separated, do we know?
It's basically Main Street. Main Street became South Valco. The shopping center became, well, what happened was in 2014, going into the new general plan, there was an intent, there was a planning intent that there would be a higher level of development there, higher density development there. And that's why it has a specific plan and is a separate area.
Commissioner Moore.
Okay, so in 2014, in the EIR process for the general plan amendment, they do reference the heart of the city plan, really just like you're describing it. And then, I was trying to follow along that process. So they do the general plan amendment, EIR, and then in December, they've somehow pulled the Balco shopping district out. So are you suggesting that we go back to the 1.5 to 1 setbacks for it?
Not particularly. I just think that there's a whole bunch of, a number of points in phase 2 where there were assertions made which are not correct. And it's just, in this particular case, how do I want to say this? The South Balco special area, Main Street, is 1.5 to 1, right? And if the effect of what we want to say here is South Balco is 1.5 to 1, and other things are whatever they are, which may be the default, that's fine with me.
Okay, so what's confusing to me is the suggestion is to eliminate the parenthetical reference to Balco shopping district for clarification. Does that actually clarify things? I mean, if what you're saying is that if it's 1.5 to 1, it almost reads as though if you were to eliminate the reference, then Balco needs to be 1.5 to 1. I find this particular footnote confusing.
I would be surprised if there was anything that ever made the Balco shopping district, that special planning area, a 1-to-1 default.
So there was no defaults at all back in the day? There's nothing set up?
The previous land use was 1.5 to 1 in the 2005
Got it.
general plan.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
got it.
so-
For all of, Main Street, Balco, and
All right.
But looking at the footnote
Panta.
here, they're referring to, they're looking at the 1-to-1 slope, and so I don't know that you want to eliminate that reference, because you've got footnote, yes, footnote 4, which is talking about the 1-to-1. It's a little, it's written in a complicated way. But I don't think that eliminating the parentheses is helping the situation. I think that you get the understanding that it's supposed to be a 1-to-1 slope.
Staff, what was the intent here? Just so we get that as well.
I think the commission's already sort of anticipated our intent. Our understanding, perhaps without a personal understanding of the history that Commissioner Fung has just mentioned, the Balco shopping district area is not part of either the North or South Park areas, and the parenthetical kind of implies that it is, because why carve something out from a prior mentioned area if it's not part of that area? So the implication of the parenthetical, we were concerned, was that some unspecified ratio applied. And so by removing it, then we hope clearer implication is that the 1-to-1 default applies.
So I think that the removing the parenthetical does achieve making it less ambiguous. In the issue column, I'm not sure that the default 1-to-1 slope line applies in that zone, and that would actually be the other issue. And that one's probably one that you want to take off and go research.
Okay.
Could you add a footnote 5, which very specifically states that for the Balco shopping district special area, you have the 1-to-1 slope line drawn from Wolf Road and Tantau Avenue, and also Balco Parkway, because that, I believe, was included in the avenues, major arterials definition. So again, I'm suggesting that you add another footnote specifically about the Balco shopping district special area and the setback there.
I think that actually you know, as we bumped in a couple times, that actually falls directly into the council's action. So they're going to set a default. So it does. I don't think that you need to make a change there. Maybe delete the parenthetical, but.
All right, I want to open stuff to public comment, and if that's okay, I think our first guest, is that okay, guys? You all right? Our first guest here is Jennifer Griffin. Please come up to the dais.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'll just make a statement that this screen has been broken for a week now, and I would hope that by next Tuesday or whenever that it be fixed. I have been in city council chambers in other cities that are not as fine as ours is, and they don't have television coverage, and I really think we need to try to expedite this. I'm not sure who would do that, but just making a statement. Anyway, there was a time when there were no special districts in Cupertino. All of this sort of emerged in about, I think it was 2008 to 2010. And a lot of the people in the public were really surprised because we really didn't have any input. We didn't know where these gateways were. It just kind of appeared. And frankly, I'd just kind of like to go back to those days. My understanding was, with Heart of the City, it was always 1.0 to 1.5, all the way down the length of Stevens Creek Boulevard. Never mind where all these different districts were. And I would prefer that it stay that way. I think it would be a lot simpler. I'm going to say the old proverb, maybe we live in abnormal times. Well, we are. We are living in abnormal times. My state is being taken over by groups of people that I don't know who they are. I am fearing for our democracy in the state. I'm worried about Washington and Oregon. And yes, the public is scared. We live in abnormal times. And I can say that because I'm a member of the public. And it needs to be said over and over and over again. We need to vote these people out. And when their terms are up, they will not be reelected. And the people that are running for those positions will not be the same people. I don't know how this started, but I hate to see my city acquiesce to tirades from Sacramento. We are being told that we don't have the rights to make the decisions for our own cities. That isn't democratic. That is some communism or socialism. Okay, you know, I was educated in the state and we have fine education, but this does not smell like democracy to me. I don't think that it's fair that we're being told by some minimum group in Sacramento what we can and can't do. And I think the repercussions are going to come out when the public starts voting, because I will not vote. This is affecting how I will vote and who I vote for in the next year. Yes, 1-to-1 and 1.5, and I know a lot about San Jose and their urban villages and every which direction, and they are a major threat to every city that are on the edge of them. And I live in threat area. We have the 10-story buildings that will be going up behind a 1-story and with a 10-foot setback. Parts of Stevens Creek Urban Village are 200 feet at Safeway. I don't think anybody knows that. And yes, Sacramento scares the hell out of me.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break before we get to ordinances. Did you submit something? Or are you good? Okay.
I have a card.
Is there one last card? That's for the second part, right? Or this part?
Well, it's a little hard to tell because you're talking about stuff that
There's no second part.
if you're going to start solidifying what you're deciding, and I haven't spoken.
Why don't you come up as well, then to come to the dais,
So I guess
and I'll restart the timer and get you going. I was just saying that we finished A, and now we're moving to B, and that's how I divide it. So go ahead.
But if what you said before is that when we go to B, are we going to be able to speak again?
Yes.
Okay, so I definitely need to speak now.
I'm not,
No, but
So,
I'd like to do-
in 2014, when all the general plan amendment was done, and some of it driven by certain developers who made decisions about what was going to be removed from heart of the city conveniently. And the 2 million square feet was put in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a big, what the heck are you doing? And so council directed staff to hold a workshop in February of 2015, which was attended by, I think, close to 100 people. And I was there, and the staff couldn't do everything they were trying to do. They had some technical difficulties, whatever. There was a lot said and a lot recorded. And I feel like none of that is being considered now, and it should be, because that was the only chance that the residents had, besides an online survey that was on the website, to answer similar questions about height, mass, setbacks, building plane. Those two documents are attached to the May 19th, 2015 staff report on these subjects, and it's like they never happened. And that's wrong, because there's no one here to say what they said 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 4.5, whatever. I just want to draw attention to it. I'm going to turn these in for the record, but you'll see, and I'll email them all to you later, but it may be too late because you're deciding things tonight. There's a summary of the online survey that shows graphics of, how many people said what about heights, and most groups wanted to keep things between 45 and 60 feet everywhere in the city, with a small exception, and that was it wasn't on the east side. So, and the setbacks, overwhelming response was, do not leave it, do not change it from 1.5 to 1. Leave it at 1.5 to 1. All the discussion I've heard tonight is 1 to 1. Anyway, there's numbers in here, there's summaries, and what's a little worrisome to me, unless I'm misunderstanding it, is the first slide with any content on it for the workshop summary says, on December 4th, 2014, the City Council formally adopted an amended general plan known as Community Vision 2040. The City Council, however, did not approve increases to development allocations other than housing element sites and office allocations for Balco. That was in parentheses. So did not approve increases to existing building heights or the proposed community benefits program. Staff report suggests that staff recommendation after getting city in May of 2015, after getting resident input in both these forms, their recommendation was to make no further amendments to the general plan, because the further amendments are going to make it worse. And here you have a chance to listen to what was said 4 years ago, and I'm not sure all of you are doing that. I'm not sure I understand it all. I just feel like this is a huge missing piece, and it shouldn't be ignored.
We're a little over, but thank you.
Yeah, I know.
So you're going to submit that?
Just for clarification, the October 2015, after some of this stuff, there was portions that were supposed to be merged with the December 2014 amendments. That's when the map got screwed up, and it never really got implemented. And that became a problem in court.
Thank you for that history. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We have no more comments, and we'll get to B. Please give that to Ben. Thank you. So we'll be back here at 9:28. in the sense that agenda item is, you can only have one comment period on one agenda item, so I'm not sure what to do.
I didn't get to say about, you guys haven't talked about land development yet, and I have a lot of comments about that. You want me to talk about it now?
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are checking on some rules here as to comments and comment periods as we do that. So I'm not going to move too far here. For those that have been watching, here's the recap. We have gone through Part A of the general plan, looking at Phase 1 general plan and zoning objective standards analysis. And that general plan, we've gone through A, footnotes 1 through 4, and are working our way towards B, C, and then zoning ordinances that should pop up. So, and the time now is 9:33. So, and we're checking because we allowed public comment before a break, and I think there's only 3 minutes for that massive agenda item. We're seeing right now if we can do anything else. So bear with us for a moment. And meanwhile, commissioners, if we can think through our thoughts on item B, Heart of the City Special Area Text Box. Let's do that for now.
Excuse me, Chair Wong. It's my understanding that, given that this is a study session, that we are allowed to ask members of the public who came and spoke questions, clarifying questions about whatever they spoke on, and that would extend their time. If we were
I believe
asking
that's
them
the case, and
questions.
I'm hoping we get some clarification. So.
Yeah, that's fine to ask them questions. Normally those questions would be based on comments that were already raised. Yeah.
Okay, item B, Heart of the City Special Area Text Box. The existing maximum residential density is 25 or 30 DU South Balco units per acre. This sentence is ambiguous. The Heart of the City land use map identifies several sites within the Heart of the City special area that have a density of 5 to 10 DU per acre, 10 to 20 DU per acre, and 20 to 35 per acre. Give me a second, I just want to make sure there's nothing on the next box here. And I think the proposal here is to avoid ambiguity. The text could be amended to be similar to the description of the Homestead special area requirements with regards to maximum residential densities, for example, up to 25 units per acre, except 35 units per acre for the South Balco sub-area. In addition, figure LU2 could be amended to include a more generic note explaining that densities are provided for reference purposes and that specific densities are established by general plan land use map or in a specific map. Okay, any comments so far? Anyone have anything to say? And I will, as chair, ask our resident Heart of the City expert, Jennifer Griffin, if they have any comments about the Heart of the City in terms of what, the specific history around this.
Okay, I've been coming here since 2003. We've been coming to this building since about 2005. And Heart of the City was always there. I believe that it was initially established in about 1995 because we actually went through hours and hours of discussion on it. And I can tell you personally that a lot of people have spent a great deal of their lifetime protecting Heart of the City. And my understanding was it was 35-foot setback from the Oaks all the way to the eastern boundary by IHOP in Cupertino, Santa Clara, a few feet, and that it always was 1.5 to 1 or 1.0 to 1.5 setback. And there have been times when all of a sudden we came to a meeting and there were maps and graphs and tables that had changed things in Heart of the City. And I was astounded because I never had any input into it. And hearing now that we have different densities along Heart of the City, I really don't want 35 dwelling units per acre. That is, I didn't even think we had that anywhere. Yeah, I'm very, very, very concerned. Lisa talked about sort of the historical part of this. Well, I can tell you, there was, I believe it was December, we got a whole bunch of graphs and maps, and it looked like Balco had been up to 200 feet high or higher. We didn't know where that was. And this is when urban villages were just in their little cradle. So yes, I'm very, very concerned about it. I think we need to go back to the historical beginning. I know the city keeps records of everything. We have mass storage in Techland, and pull up some of the history of the discussions on Urban Village. Because to me, nothing ever got taken out of the urban village. It is still there. And I live next to the heart of the city. It's still there. And we are trying hard to extend heart of the city into San Jose, but they resist us. But we will prevail. Santa Clara seems to be more amendable, but it is one of the proudest things that I have in my life is heart of the city, and it will not go down easily. I swear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anything you guys want to change to this? Any comments, commissioners?
I have no comment. I mean, I think it's okay.
I think it's okay. I mean,
Yeah, I'm just curious to hear about the reasons behind that 1.5 to 1 ratio transfer. Was it just to allow greater density, like from the commissioners who might have an idea, or was there
history on the density on the setback ratios?
yeah
Setback.
setback to
Lower density, actually, or broader streets, or some kind of view. I think that's what it was. I believe that's what it is. So, okay.
okay thanks.
And no comments on B. Okay, let's go to C. Woo. And victory. Great. Okay, C. All right. East Stevens Creek, West Stevens Creek, and Central Stevens Creek subareas. General plan goals, LU 14 through 18, state that permitted use in these areas are described in figure LU 2. Land use 2, there could be confusion in that these subareas do not appear on figures LU 2. However, these subareas are described and established in Chapter 2 of the general plan, planning areas, and are existing areas identified in the heart of the city-specific plan. Goals LU 14 through 18 are essentially nested goals that support goal LU 13. Amend the text in general plan goal LU 13 to clarify that the heart of the city special area is composed of all subareas geographically contained within it, which are further described in goals LU 14 through 18. I'll just say I have no problems with this, but I'm not sure if anyone else does. Any other comments, anyone? Okay, can we move on and get to Part 2 zoning ordinance? Everyone okay with that? Commissioner Moore, you okay? I think you're looking up something. All right, we'll wait a few seconds here.
And while we're waiting, it's fine to let the public make additional comment under the
Study
city
session
procedures in the
rules.
Brown Act. Yeah.
Yeah, these are study session rules. Okay, good. It would be fun.
Well, one thing that's kind of interesting in the West Stevens Creek Boulevard sub-area, policy LU 14.4, De Anza College Node. Buildings should be designed to fit into the surroundings with pedestrian orientation, externalizing activities by providing cafeterias, bookstores, and plazas along the street and near corners is encouraged. Is this De Anza College Node, are we talking about the actual college property? And then the question is, what authority do we have for anything that they do on the De Anza College property? Is there anything, do we have any authority there?
I thought this was about the Oaks and the area where that Panda Express is, but can someone clarify?
Well, this item C says West Stevens Creek and Central Stevens Creek subareas. When I look at West Stevens Creek Boulevard subarea, it has the policy 14.4 for De Anza College. So it's included in here. I'm just wondering what authority we've got over that area. For instance, because they're talking about perhaps having some housing added there, and there's been the issue with the Flint Center.
historically, we've had, at least I've not had no experience with any De Anza College activity. Meaning, nothing at De Anza College has come to the Planning Commission.
So the city does not have jurisdiction over De Anza College property, so anything they would propose would go through the district and go through the state for evaluation, also architecture design. So technically, it does not come through the city.
May I clarify something that occurred during the Environmental Review Committee meeting about projects which potentially impact the city of Cupertino? So there's a concept to allow, because currently we cannot discuss projects which wouldn't come before the Planning Commission or City Council, but there's a concept to alter the municipal code so that projects that would go on at De Anza, or it could be something in Sunnyvale or Lehigh, that to alter the municipal code so the Environmental Review Committee would be able to look at those projects for their environmental effects on us.
Okay.
I think the situation with De Anza College is similar to the school districts. Separate jurisdiction, they're administered by the state, they have a state architect. I do believe that the city has the opportunity to provide input to the state architect as part of their review process. So, it's not completely without input, but there is no, there's no discretion approval or even any hearings related to what's done.
Yeah, we only get an input piece, if I believe correctly. Okay. We are clear on part one. Can we go to zoning ordinances? Anyone, any other comments there? Okay. Zoning ordinance, planned development districts, section 19.80.030 in the Cupertino Municipal Code. B, all P districts shall be identified on the zoning map with the letter coding P, followed by a specific reference to the general type of use allowed in the particular planning development zoning district. For example, a planned development zoning district in which the uses are to be general commercial in nature will be designated as PCG. A planned development zoning district in which the uses are intended to be a mix of general commercial and residential will be designated as PCG/RES. Permitted uses, and C, permitted uses in a P zoning district shall consist of all uses which are permitted in the zoning district which constitutes the designation following the letter coding P. For example, the permitted uses in PCG zoning district are the same uses which are permitted in a CG zoning district for sites with a mixed-use residential designation. Section 19.80.030F of the Municipal Code shall apply. And D, conditional uses in a P zoning district shall consist of all uses which require the issuance of a conditional use permit in the zoning district, which constitutes the designation following the letter coding P. For example, the conditional uses in a PCG zoning district are the same uses which require a conditional use permit in CG zoning district. Each conditional use in a P zoning district requires a separate conditional use permit for sites with a mixed-use residential designation. Section 19.80.030F of the Municipal Code shall apply. So what's the issue? Well, the issue is the code does not establish development standards for P zoning districts. It contemplates the standards will be developed as part of the discretionary development permit for the site. The city's practice has been to apply the development standards from the R3 zones for attached multifamily mixed-use applications or the R2 zone standards for small lot single-family /townhouse applications, which are then modified during the design review process to develop the standards for each development. For projects subject to new state laws that are subject to only objective zoning standards, there are no applicable adopted development standards. Therefore, a change to the zoning code is proposed. Here's what staff has proposed. Codify the city's current practice or develop and adopt development and design guidelines for different development types such as townhouses, row houses, attached multifamily, etc. A form-based code may establish the most objective standards for implementation and ensure that there is a minimum room for interpretation. All right, let's open up to comments from our fellow commissioners. Anybody want to jump in? I'm just going to say something that's crazy, but let's just get rid of the P designation. Apply underlying zoning that's there. If there are some conflicting requirements, the most restrictive will be applied. I suggest that. Just get rid of the P ones. Move them back to where we were before, and then when we need to actually do something, we'll just build a specific plan for that area. I don't know if anyone has any objections to that. And historically, why do we have P designations again? So, just so everybody's knowledge, if anybody knows. Commissioner Fung, would you like to say something?
Well, no, I was going to say,
We're all looking at you.
the staff guys, well,
I mean, an assistant
I
director.
think we asked that question.
Fung.
We asked that question before, and there was an answer to that.
Pooh. So,
Yeah, I think asked and answered about 3 hours ago. But the P doesn't. I don't know the history of it, obviously, but I think in general the P designation allows a little bit of flexibility in terms of use and
Just get rid of it.
What gets proposed on site. So if the commission wishes to just remove the P zoning designation, that could be a recommendation.
I would like to, but I don't know if anybody else is in agreement with that.
I'm in agreement with that, actually, because it looks as though what it was used for was to relax standards beyond what the underlying zoning required previously.
I'm curious to other commissioners' views. Commissioner Takahashi, Commissioner Saxena, Commissioner Fung.
I think, so let me just understand this a bit more. Could a developer still ask for a special plan for that area where they give some concessions for making some exceptions if we get rid of it?
I believe they would start with what is in the existing general plan, and at that point, they would actually have to come up with their specific plan that meets approval at that point. But all objective standards of the general plan would apply at that point, and those special districts would not have any kind of exceptions.
Okay, so they could still, just by getting rid of P zone, the city will still keep the ability to give some concessions, assuming it makes sense, and there is some gain for the city.
There are opportunities for the city to be in a better negotiating position for concessions should it be needed, and to build more affordable housing as if needed.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's what I wanted to understand, the implication of doing this.
Staff, any comments? Let's get through our comments first, and we'll go to the public.
Just one real quick comment. I don't know if I've said this before already, but the P does allow a little bit of flexibility, and that means it's an opportunity to have sort of a mixed-use type of district or areas, and it's fairly common designation and planning technique in other cities as well. So just throwing out there.
Yep, I believe it was popular the same year. Everyone decided that it'd be great to put those roundabouts in every city.
So I support the existing plan, with P zoning. I actually support the wording you have here as well. The interesting question is, by the default. So this kind of asserts that there's some ambiguity about what the default conditions are under P, and it isn't clear. It isn't clear to me where that ambiguity would be. So I think that one part of that, I don't know whether maybe you actually have to come for a council approval to get a P designation. That wouldn't get rid of the P zones or change the way that they operate, but you wouldn't be able to get one.
Not off the bat.
You wouldn't be able to get one administratively. That would be a possibility, but I think the starting point for things that are grouped into P zone, into P zone anywhere where the defaults for the conditions. So just the first part of this just basically says, make that explicit, and that would be sufficient for me.
Commissioner Moore.
Okay. This item references the planned CG/residential designation, and when you look at the City of Cupertino land use map, commercial residential is listed as a non-residential land use designation, and as is commercial office residential, office industrial commercial residential, et cetera. There's an entire list of these. And for these non-residential land use designations, it's supposed to be a predominantly the non-residential usage. So that would mean over 50%. For instance, if you had industrial residential, the project would be, over 50% industrial with supporting residential in that use. And I think that needs to be a little bit more clearly stated, or we all need to, come to an agreement that those are the definitions. I think it's in the appendices where those are defined more fully in the general plan. So I would like to have that mentioned, that these are that this example here is a non-residential land use.
Okay.
Where that comes into play. Well, I don't think I can talk about that.
Are we still okay with, is there any comments on removing the P designations for where we are today?
Well, I guess the question is then, what is the default zoning on the land use map?
Would be CG. It would be industrial, CG, R1.
Right, so that
No,
doesn't...
I mean, you don't know. Is it
that's...
is it CG or residential, right?
I think you run into problems too when you actually, I'm going to reverse my statement. I think you're actually going to run into some problems if they're listed as non-residential and you break it apart, because now you could end up with predominantly residential in an area that the city designated was supposed to be subordinate, right? And then if you're looking in terms of, they made this zoning so that for tax reasons, for city funding, that if you change everything into having it allowable to be highly residential throughout the whole city, and we know our difficulties with having San Jose on our borders and with a lot of our commercial area. On De Anza, for instance. So I could see this could have some unintended consequences.
Can we have staff evaluate what happens if we remove P designations and what those designations should be?
Yeah, we can certainly provide an evaluation.
I would also comment that I think having a P designation, having an unambiguous P designation is important. Many of the housing opportunities that come in the future are going to come from mixed use. Heart of the city today is already, PCG res. So, in the future, some of those buildings, some of the places that are office buildings today or residential buildings may become, a store with homes on top of it, Safeway with homes on top of it. And that's actually a good thing.
Those are great, actually.
That's the best opportunity for development. So I think that making it difficult to have P zones would be negative in terms of the ability to produce housing. But having it be clear what rules apply when you combine zones is important.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, if you're looking at a commercial, residential, non-residential land use designation, you would not be able to get your Safeway with multi-story residential above it, because your residential would end up being more than 50%, I would think.
For heart of the city.
Yes, if that's where this was just like a hypothetical, I think.
Yeah.
So, in your example, actually removing the P designation would get you what you're looking for.
It's not true. It's only if putting housing on top of Safeway causes the entire heart of the city P zone to become residential dominant. It's not on a lot by lot basis.
Is that true?
What do you think, Ben?
I don't have to get back to you on that one.
Don't even want to think about what that might be.
I actually, what I'm looking for is a reevaluation of these P zones so that we understand, should we put more residential in those planned areas that we may not end up with more office, right? And thinking about it. I mean, there are multiple ways to get here. One might be doing a complete office moratorium across the city. And then the second would then result in looking at how we rezone all those P designations to see which one have residential potential and retail potential. And so that's one option to kind of take a look at it. But I think my thought process by removing the P designation is that we will have much more control case by case to identify areas we can put more residential units and reduce the office units as needed and keep the balance as we need for retail for tax purposes. Right now, these designations are open. I mean, it's like open fodder depending on what kind of housing bill shows up, and that's what I'm worried about.
Are they really open if it's, if it's less than 50% residential, or, are there some housing bills which would circumvent that?
Not yet, but I'm sure someone's listening in, and some legislative aide's working on this right now as I speak. I mean, so, who knows? I mean,
Generally, most of the bills have been advanced, they streamline your ability to build in the existing zoning.
Right.
So that's not an issue.
Right, but
I mean, the only place where it's an issue is, if you interpret P zoning to be primarily this versus that, then that does potentially impose a limit.
I know we want more housing. We don't want to create an imbalance on office to housing, and I think this opens that up for that imbalance, which is what I'm really concerned about, because the housing bills really don't care if there's an imbalance for office to housing, and I think that's at the heart of the problem with some of these housing bills.
Correct. I mean, the non-residential land use designation has the imbalance built right into it.
That's what I'm worried about in these P zones. So, I mean, can we remove all the P districts that are potentially problems that cause a office to housing imbalance? I mean, that's one way to get at it.
Okay, so that, if you wanted to do that, you would get rid of the office of the commercial office
PCG
residential.
ones, yep.
Well, it's commercial office residential, and then you've got office industrial commercial residential. Those would probably be the most onerous of the land use designations.
Interesting. Any other comments from the commissioners? This is our last agenda item. I'm going to see if there's any comments from the public.
There are enormous financial impacts from what's being contemplated.
All right. Well,
it's interesting. It's interesting. You don't have to go back very far to the time when the heart of the city, they were very protective, very defensive of not allowing homes to be built because they don't generate sales tax.
right.
Right. And so, if your intention is to flip that upside down, that would have impact.
But we get ownership. Ownership allows us property tax, not rental, right? We get property tax revenue from ownership. I mean, if they're rental units, we don't get anything out of it, but ownership we get.
Yeah. And that actually, this would be one of the things where I think staff will jump in at some point and say that there would be a concern about rental units. Parcelization is always an issue around, planning issue. Because the first time you parcelize, that will be what it is forever.
So I will say to the Planning Commission, if you would allow staff the opportunity to evaluate the impact of removing the P designation, we'll
Please
come
do.
back for a report, and that way you can make a more informed decision, right?
And I hope you would also include that option to look at what if you made granting a P designation something that required a hearing.
Okay. Comments from the public. I believe Jennifer Griffin, you've got a comment. It doesn't right now?
Wait, this is getting so totally bizarre. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and I'm really, really concerned about this. I never, ever thought that my city, that we'd be having discussions like this, of having Sacramento telling us how we're zoning our properties. You guys have to remember that people in planned development own their property. And Sacramento cannot write laws where they are taking property away from homeowners. They are not forcibly seizing it. This is not a communist country. This is not a socialist country. The way the state is run, it is a democracy. And what is coming down from Sacramento is making me wonder the validity of these laws in terms of, are they socialistic, Bolshevik, or communist? I don't want to have to change every zoning in my city because a minority of people, a small group of people in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, And Sacramento, for some reason, are telling the rest of the state how they run their business. I cannot reiterate this again. We are going into dangerous territories. Oak Valley is planned development. Okay, I don't know if you guys realize that. Oak Valley is owned by individual owners. It is a lovely area, but it is planned development, and you have to have approval to do certain things. Even San Jose has planned development. You know that Star City thing that they're building there with 800 studios in it, where they're going to have people that I guess are under 30 living in, I don't know, dormitories, and it's 22 stories tall, and there's no parking, and it's 800 housing units. They even just created a new P zoning that's called like pedestrian walkthrough or something. They're even still using P. So I don't want us to be dropping P until, I don't even think we can do that tonight because it wasn't on the agenda. The city council needs to discuss it. And like, I think you asked the city staff to come up with the repercussions of this, because I am really getting concerned here that because of these 200 ADU socialistic housing communistic laws or whatever they are, that we're having to completely defend and rewrite everything in our city. Why are we doing that? Why aren't we doing the pushback and asking Sacramento, what is the intent? Believe me, I can't wait to vote some of these people out, but they're not even my politicians. But no, don't get rid of P. We need to, San Jose thinks it's good enough. It should be good enough for us. And remember, a lot of the people in P planned development own their property, and they cannot be forced to give it to the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Lisa Warren?
P, no P, who, that's the question. It just brings an opportunity, I think, for me to bring something up. We have this phase 2 chart draft, and I actually think there's some items on phase 2 that should be in phase 1. And if you start talking about, I've heard retail people say mixed use is okay because they have feet on the street there. However, they don't like the stack and pack. They have a hard time filling the stack and pack. They like horizontal, basically standalone retail in the mix, not layered cake. And I think that's proven over and over again that doesn't always work. So I'm just bringing that up because one of the examples was putting this housing over Safeway. I'm not sure that's such a great plan. And that being said, if you keep packing with houses, yeah, we need more housing. We need less office, or less than we have, really, but less that's being proposed. A moratorium, I believe, is appropriate. But if you keep packing with houses, what does that do to your parkland and your health and safety and your environment and your sustainability and everything else? Houses don't come without problems. So please don't go overboard and overhouse like we've already over-officed. There's a big picture that needs to be kept track of and input from all the moving parts. And that's it, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for the feedback. I wanted to add something. As I was going through the ordinance cleanup that's here, I wanted to make a suggestion, and it's in line with what's been going on with what the City Council has, is to make a recommendation to Council to rescind the ordinance number 182178 because it's inconsistent with the general plan. For those who, nice little guest here. This was the ordinance of City Council ordinance number 182178 was an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Cupertino rezoning the parcels within the Balco special area. Part of the reason for that is because this no longer applies, because one, we don't have a specific plan, and second of all, the designation is incorrect at the moment. And also because even in the LU2 map, we don't even have any height restrictions or anything for that Balco specific area. So that's my suggestion here. And as part of this cleanup that we're doing on ordinances, so if you want to look it up again, 182178 is the one here that is being under consideration. So, and the main thing is the APN, the current zoning. What I'd like to suggest is suggest that the Balco specific area plan be restored to P, which is still there, P regional shopping, and P CG, and the APM current zoning reflect that back to where it was originally in that exhibit Z1, which is bringing it back to what the Balco area was. And then an action, so that we don't get rid of all the housing there, permitting 389 dwelling units with retail, but no office, and a recommendation to council that the city of Cupertino consider building to the maximum density per general plan of 592 units with an option of a 35% density bonus, which may take this to 800. So give some people some time to read that. That will clean up some of the stuff that's here in LU2 for a specific plan. No, Commissioner Moore?
Well, okay, so I'm looking at the zoning map, and I agree that there's inconsistency. So the City of Cupertino zoning map shows Balco Town Center for the Balco area, and the general plan, because it reverted back, it is the Balco Shopping District special area. So that would be an inconsistency. And the zoning map refers to the color, in the legend, it says Balco Town Center adopted by ordinance 2178. And then this is sort of hanging out there now, and it doesn't have a underlying general plan support. So I agree that it is inconsistent and it needs to be fixed.
So maybe I'll direct this to the city staff. There's a standing policy when the specific plan is rescinded, the land use designation is changed at that point, and then there would be a normal cleanup item where there's some amount of time for zoning to be conformed to the current outstanding land use. So I think that this probably is something that it can just happen as a part of a regular.
It should have been cleaned up, is what I'm trying to say. I spent about 20 hours researching what's going on with our ordinances.
But the mechanism for cleaning up is kind of automatic. Areas are always, the zoning is always, the direction is zoning is supposed to be conformed to upon a change in land use.
Well, I think if you agree with that, let's at least put this here, and if it turns out it's automatic, let's make it automatic. So it's not an extra step. If it's not an extra step and has to be cleaned up, let's get it done.
Chair Wong, I would agree with making the changes to the zoning map, but you added in several, it seemed like, other elements to the
Okay, well, let's change it first.
Could you go over what those ideas are? And then I'm wondering, how are your ideas different from what I heard City Council suggesting already?
That's what I was...
That was supposed to be coming back to us anyway, from the way I understand?
Right.
All right, so let's say City Council come back to us in the next Planning Commission meeting. Then the first part is all I would need at the moment in terms of saying let's do the cleanup and make sure that ordinance is rescinded and every designations go back to where they are. Should City Council not come back to us in the next week or two or in the next meeting, what I'm afraid of is the perception that we are getting rid of housing in that area, and I don't want that perception. So I hope that we keep that 389 units that are there. And that's all. I wanted to do that, and that was my concern. So.
Aren't you just basically wanting this zoning map to have the right label on?
Yes, I do.
Balco?
I want the right label.
It's pretty much a label.
Okay, let's just fix the label first and see what City Council does.
So it'll say what it said before, the Balco
shopping district area, special area, regional shopping area.
Mm-hmm.
And if I heard...
Then you can't build houses there. It needs to be regional shopping res. Something that hasn't been done before, and I don't believe we can enact that because it's a special.
Right.
This is a area subject to a
session.
specific plan. So,
but there's no specific plan that's valid there anymore.
Yeah, that's right, but you can't make a change either because the general plan requires there to be a specific plan.
So all we're asking is for a cleanup there on the ordinance so that it gets fixed.
Yes,
I'll just say I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah, because I'm a bit confused because I think Commissioner Fung had said that once we do that, things will go back and we won't have to do something. That's what I understood. But I think now that may not happen. Is the concern that we might lose the housing part of it? Like you mentioned that.
It's certainly the case. If you were to change the designation for the Balco area to P retail,
Right,
whatever.
but the whole point of this meeting is not to make any changes.
That's right.
Right? And I think that's an important, we're making recommendations with regard to Phase 1 elements, but we cannot make specific changes in this meeting. Is that, I guess I'm looking to...
Well, I just want to say, we're getting a little off topic here, but I do want to reassure the commission that the city attorney's office and staff are already aware of this issue, and you'll likely have something similar to what you're talking about put before you not too long. We are trying to coordinate it, however, with the general plan amendment. It's premature, obviously, to make significant zoning changes on parcels that will be amended in the general plan, and so we're trying to synchronize those actions.
So let me recap. I made a proposal to clean up this ordinance that is hanging out there because there's no specific plan or anything tied to it because of council's actions of rescinding a number of ordinances. Commissioner Fung mentioned that these things should have happened anyways in the cleanup. We've noted that nothing has happened to date. It should have happened automatically. Commissioner Saxena asked that question again as to, well, if nothing happened, then what is this about? And Commissioner Takahashi was trying to keep us in line in terms of the items on the agenda. So that's the recap, right? Yep. And Commissioner Moore was also in favor of just having this part rescinded. And Commissioner Fung mentioned that if we put this back to the original designation, we would lose the housing element. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page at the moment.
No, I don't see how we would lose the housing just by changing the label on the zoning map, especially since when the rescinded the municipal code changes, that had Balco Town Center in it. So now the municipal code no longer has that portion. So that's gone. So there's really, this like has no legs. There's, there's nothing that's saying that this should be labeled Balco Town Center. It's not in the municipal code. It's not in the general plan. There's no basis for this, and we're just reverting back to where we were on, October 1st, 2018.
Okay, so my point here is, can we at least make a recommendation that council clean this up in the municipal code, and that designation matches what it's supposed to be? Or we don't need to do that? You're saying it's just going to happen automatically? It hasn't. That's why I'm asking.
I think that they actually have already expressed their intent to make changes, so I don't see that there's anything to be done here.
This is inconsistent. We have to be consistent. So there is a reason we need to do this for internal consistency.
So if we do ask for rescindment of this, will or will it not affect the housing element? Is my essential question. Does the city staff or the attorney have any view on that?
I'll just tell you again, we're looking at this now. We're already aware of this issue. Mm-hmm. I think it's unnecessary for you to make this recommendation just based on my reassurance that we're looking into this and we're going to take action. And we're just trying to synchronize it with the general plan amendment the council's already considering. And when will I can't stop you from recommending it, so if you'd like to, that's fine too.
I think if we recommend it, it'll just get the council's hand and they'll go to their own schedule, if that's okay. Right? If people, if we agree, disagree, and vote on it, council will have to take action on it, and if it's already in it, let's line the schedule in the right way.
Okay, so you're recommending that we clean up some internal consistency problems that exist because of the zoning map as it stands.
And I think be relatively vague on that front, given it's really at the direction of the city council.
Okay.
Right?
That makes sense. All right, so...
Some language which says, please review this, or
I think we should recommend that council restore the Balco specific area plan back to its P regional shopping and PCG designation. And then that's our recommendation. And then they will choose the timeline and price as appropriate, as part of the general plan amendments. Does that sound right, Commissioner Takahashi?
I'm thinking.
Okay. Process that. I just want to make sure we're doing it the right way.
Well, reviewing the general plan is under, that is under our authority. So, we need to decide if is this inconsistent, which it appears to be, and then it's our job to then make a recommendation about it.
Any objections here? Any comments?
Can we restate what we believe the inconsistency to be?
Okay, so the general plan refers to the Balco shopping district specific plan area. And in the general plan, they have some requirements for that area, that it be a shopping, dining, and entertainment destination for
Regional.
for the region. They also have the 600,000 square feet retail minimum with a 30% entertainment maximum, that they allow office uses, they allow residential, and is there anything else? And hotel.
I'm impressed, Commissioner Moore. You have nothing in front of you. You're reciting that off the top of your head.
It's pretty sad.
Okay, interesting.
So if you want to revert to that, then you will add office function. That was part of the land use that exists in the specific plan today, or in the general plan today. If you want to set the zoning to be shopping only, then you can't have houses there. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish.
I'm just cleaning up the code.
Well,
I'm just cleaning up the code
I think
there.
it's actually making it worse.
No, it's got. But you said it would automatically revert, and now it's not. Let's just clean it up now. That's what I'm
No,
saying.
it's an action. This is an action, right? The council needs to take an action.
All
They have
right.
an obligation. They have a
All right.
timeline.
Well, I'm making a recommendation that they hurry up.
And they don't have to listen to that.
And they don't have to listen to
part of
it
the-
if you're
part of
watching.
the- well-
but I'm asking, let's do that. I mean, at least we should be proactive about cleaning these things up.
One element of the legislation that was passed to approve the Balco Town Center specific plan was to conform the zoning, to match the new land use designations that were approved, right? That has a time set on it. You have, it's probably 6 months to conform the municipal code, the zoning map, and any other documents that either has been done or not done. And if they rescind it, then they need to change it back, and that is again a council action that they need to just.
It's ultimately a council action. I'd like to make a recommendation that we clean it up. It sounds like, I'm just kind of curious as to what the commissioners all think. And I'll just kind of go down the line.
I think going back to a previous comment, which was being more vague with regard to that, stating that action and recommend that action, that the Planning Commission supports the general plan to be consistent with where the council is going.
And they haven't gone yet.
Right.
They haven't
They
gone
haven't
yet,
gone
so
yet.
there's nothing, there's not a
Right.
possibility
That's
to
the-
consistent.
right, so-
You could revert it to what it was before.
But part of our job
You
is
know-
to make sure it's cleaned up as a planning commission, and that's really why I'm making that argument.
So I guess-
And I know it's getting late. It's our last item here, and I was also going to make a recommendation that we move phase 2 to a different night to have that conversation, but also to take item 8 into phase 1, which is lot cover, all the different things. So, but that's just something to talk about. So, but anyways, back to this item. Commissioner Moore, you were going to say something? Sorry.
Yes, so Government Code Section 65300.5 requires a general plan to be integrated and internally consistent and compatible state of policies. And so I think that actually this should have happened perhaps as a staff recommendation to City Council already. And while we are doing this, sort of to remedy the situation, it really we shouldn't have had to do this. This should have already happened.
That's the automatic part.
That's
I mean,
the process.
it's not staff's intention to not have these things be conforming.
So this is provided for in state law. The language is simply that if an inconsistency becomes, manifests through a general plan amendment or otherwise, they shall be brought into conformity within a reasonable time. So these actions, if I recall, were taken on May 7th. So we're a little shy of 2 months from that date. I haven't looked into what reasonable means. Shy of 2 months sounds pretty reasonable to me. I mean, and I've told you several times now that we are moving forward on this, so I
understand that we're moving forward on it. I think as a planning commission, we have a duty to at least make a recommendation that it be done. I might disagree on how specific we do that or how vague, as Commissioner Takahashi recommends. I'd like to propose a language that says that Planning Commission is aware that there is a inconsistency with the specific ordinance, 182178, and recommends that council take the appropriate action in the appropriate timeline to make that change. Is that okay with everyone?
I agree with that.
Again, I just question why you would make a recommendation for something that
Should have been done.
that
Well-
may be happening. It's in process now.
To reiterate the emphasis and to reiterate and emphasize the point that this needs to be done. It's a cleanup item. We're in the spirit of cleaning up these ordinances. I wanted to make sure we did do that. So that's it. So we got Commissioner Takahashi. Are you okay with that? Commissioner Saxena, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Commissioner Moore, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Commissioner Fung, are you okay with that?
No.
He's not, and I am okay with that. Okay, so that's just for the record. All right, so we are set there. We are going to move Phase 2 to the next date, but is there any items in Phase 2 you want to move to Phase 1 as we continue that discussion?
Parkland.
Parklands, okay.
I would ask that we not do that. It was not part of not agendized, so.
It was agendized. Item 2 was there, and we're pushing it out, actually. It's right here. It's
moving things from 2 to 1. Was that in the staff report?
Let's look at the staff guideline. Let's see if Commissioner Fung's point is valid. Let's see what we're supposed to do here. We're supposed to answer 3 questions, if I remember.
It seems to me that you could take the third item, does the Planning Commission have direction or any prioritization with respect to the topics to be evaluated as part of the Phase 2 process? Given that there's about, 52 items in Phase 2 versus, we only had 4 pages of larger text in Phase 1, I would think that prioritization could also involve moving the certain items from Phase 2 to Phase 1.
Okay.
With the attorney or the city.
Yeah, we contemplated, I realize that's not in these items. Frankly, these are kind of a framework for the discussion, and you're not bound by them. You can.
We're in a study session. I mean,
you can propose moving, if you agree, something from Phase 2 to Phase 1. We do want to make clear, though, that the reason we put everything in Phase 1 that's there is because it can be acted on quickly, and the things in Phase 2 are less, they're harder.
Is there work?
So-
Is there work? Since I seem to be preempting work that's being done at City Council, so apologies there. Is there work that's on objective standards as listed in line under 8, so that we talk about FARs and lot coverage and parklands and all those kind of things? Is that work that's in progress? I'm asking Seth, our attorney.
So just to clarify, Chairperson Wong, you're referencing to item 8 on the land use community design. It says have requirements for all specific plan areas such as height, decreased density to match allocations, and table LU1, so on and so forth. And the question is if that is something that
Council's working on already.
that council is currently working on.
Because I think it's important that we have objective standards that hit those areas, FARs, setbacks, heights, those kind of things. Parklands. Commissioner Moore?
Also, item 20, the policy for extremely low-income housing, if someone would like to, move that to Phase 1 and consider adding a percentage to that.
To the specific plans as well, yep. I mean,
Well, actually, Right now, in the general plan, you've got, pertaining to rental BMR, it says 15% of the units.
And
so-
we also want ownership BMRs as well.
Yes, that's also the 15%. So you might want to consider adding an ELI percentage. And there was also the question about housing for the developmentally disabled.
Yep. That's one.
And something about the affordable to 80%. It's called, teacher housing.
I'd like to ask that staff take a look if we can move those into phase one and if it's easy enough to pass as part of that.
So those are actually subject to the BMR mitigation manual, which is in progress. That's a work in progress right now.
I believe so, yes.
The allocation, the split of ELI, VLI, VLI, LI, moderate, that's actually all in the mitigation manual, which they're reviewing at this point.
That's also part of the
Housing Commission.
Housing Commission work
Right.
program
Yes.
item as well. So that's
right.
for the upcoming fiscal year.
How do those schedules merge? At what timeline do they converge?
I'll have to check in with our housing division.
Okay, we'll check with them. All right, with that, any other comments? Because I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. if everyone's
Okay,
with it.
so is there any chance to move, like the definition of parkland, item 52?
Oh,
into-
yeah, like
into phase-
Parkland is I
phase
lumped
one?
it into 8.
Is it, so it's moved?
I would like to move it. Any objection to moving parklands and parkland space into that?
Again, one of the things that was clear in the staff memo, in the staff report, was that there were reasons things were in phase one and things were in phase two. So I certainly can understand prioritization, given that not all the things in phase two, are staffable. The prioritization has some value, but,
I think
there's never anything that stops you from making a recognition to move, but I think it's not really well considered because that wasn't part of the scope of what was contemplated here.
I think Commissioner Fung's point about where things fit has some validity with what staff can do. Acting Director Fu, can we take a look to see if that's valid to move into phase one in terms of what your staff resources are? And should there not be enough staff resources, let us know to see how we can.
Yeah, we
help
can
with
certainly take a look at that, but I can tell you that moving the parklands into phase one will in fact slow down the phase one overall, unless you want to allow phase one move forward as you've discussed, but just move parks into phase 1B or something like that, just higher, something to consider. But moving that directly to phase one will basically slow down phase one.
Could it be left to city council to decide,
We can
once
give it to
it
city council
arrives?
to decide, yeah.
Right. that
I mean,
they-
city council ultimately going to decide. We can make a recommendation to do that, and should they do that, you should have some more resources. We see. I
So
cannot guarantee that. I do not speak for city
At the outset, I
council.
suggested that there be a separate category of things which were the higher, elevated out of the phase two group, but not necessarily into phase one. So, I think that actually fits the description of the things that are being discussed here. I have no issue with saying, even without having a full discussion of all the points, if you want to put two of those things in that bin, in the, I don't know what you want to call it, a 1.5 bin, that's okay.
We now have a 1.5. Okay, 1.5 is item 8, item 22, and item 51. Is that what it was? 52. Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn, anybody?
But before we do that, because it's slightly unusual to not complete the agenda and not take an action on the items you've discussed tonight, just wanted to present a couple options.
Thank
so
you.
one, you could take an action on the recommendations you've discussed tonight.
That we have agreement.
If
yes.
you feel like you have agreement on them and you can remember what they are, or we could just say, if you feel like you've reached agreement on the stuff you've discussed in the phase one table, you could make a motion to adopt those recommendations as discussed, and then
I make a motion to put forward a recommendation to council on the areas that we agreed on, and we got to go figure out what those were. So, unless you guys have been keeping track, which I think we had almost everything but 2 items.
So I'll second that for the purpose of discussion. This is a study session. Normally, we don't actually vote on recommendations in the study session, so I think that we shouldn't do that.
okay, that's fair.
But I
Yeah.
think that you've got a big lump of things carried forward.
Yeah.
And some clear things that we want to have come back.
We probably about 90% agreement on the items that we have. If you can clearly identify those, then it'll make it a lot easier on the next meeting, and then we'll work on the exceptions in phase 2.
Okay, and then as for the second portion, is it the commission's desire that the council receive the phase 1 and phase 2 recommendations in time for their July 16th meeting? In which
I
case
think phase 1 is what we're trying to get there, and
Okay.
maybe phase 1.5, depending on staff resources.
Okay, because if you want to ensure that phase 2 recommendations get to them in time for that meeting, we may have to call a special meeting.
And I'd like to call a special meeting at some point. I don't know what date would work.
Okay.
Is there any reason why we can't be, or can we be adjourning to this special meeting date and make it a date certain now?
Because we'll have to see if the community hall is available.
And your availability as commissioners.
Yeah, exactly.
So take that as the action item to coordinate on dates. I'll leave that to our acting director, Ben Fu, to do that, and we'll provide dates that are available within the next 4 weeks that we can meet for we're going to need 2 special meetings, I think.
And then with regard to what's moved forward to council, I would ask that because we had plenty of discussion on the phase 1 list, that be moved forward, and that the phase 1.5 or that group, because there's been no discussion about those, or phase 2, that we just
Correct, in the special meeting.
identify the fact that group was identified, and that there was no discussion at that point.
And just to be clear, within that group, I want to point out the first full paragraph at the top of page 2 of the staff report actually did mention another important suggestion that we've recommended for phase 1, but it will take a little longer, which is seeing if we can craft or incorporate existing mitigation measures from prior EIRs into standard conditions of approval. So I don't know if you noticed that in the staff report, but you did. Okay, so that could be included in a 1.5 phase, perhaps. If you choose.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Okay. So we have agreement
So
there?
I had notes on that one. I was not crazy about that.
Okay.
In the phase 2 listings, I think that, the EIR, you're looking very specifically at, when the citywide, when the citywide general plan was approved, that EIR was looking at very specific usage around town. If that usage is not the usage, then I don't think that the mitigations are applicable, or not. There's no way to know if they're applicable, so I think that you actually need to be studying that.
I'm going to make a motion to adjourn, if you're okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. I think we've got some action items in place. We're going to create a special meeting at some point, 2 special meetings to accelerate this to fit the council's timeline. We still have discussions on phase 2 and some of the items that you discussed on the attorney side. And everybody have a good night. Motion to adjourn? Second. Okay. I guess all in favor? Voice vote? I'm not going to set a vote. We're good. We're out of here. You guys are out of here. Let's go. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching.